Hey there, story lovers. This is The Fiction World, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Deku reincarnated in DxD as Beast King and conquered breeding harem with Rias, Xenovia and all devil girls? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, The King Without a Crown. The first thing Izuku noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind. Not the silence of a hospital room after the machine stopped beeping or the quiet of a battlefield after the last punch lands. This was the silence of somewhere genuinely, fundamentally other, like the world itself hadn't decided yet what sounds it was going to make. The second thing he noticed was that he wasn't dead. Which was strange, because he was pretty sure he should be. He lay face up on cold stone, staring at a sky that was the wrong color, too deep a purple, threaded with something luminous that wasn't quite aurora and wasn't quite lightning, somewhere between the two in the way that beautiful things sometimes exist between categories. Trees surrounded him on three sides, enormous and dark, their bark the color of charcoal and their leaves a deep, arterial red. Wind moved through them and they whispered in a language that almost sounded like words. Izuku sat up slowly. His hands were different. Still scarred, the damage was there, baked into the architecture of his fingers like it had always been, but the rest of him felt new in a way that had no precise language. Stronger. Younger by some measure that had nothing to do with age. He was wearing dark clothes he didn't recognize, a simple long-sleeved shirt, dark trousers, worn boots that fit perfectly. His hair fell into his eyes the same as always, green and untamable. He pressed both palms flat against the stone beneath him and breathed. Okay, he thought. Okay. Assess. You're alive. You're somewhere. You don't know where. Start there. His last clear memory was the final battle, all for one successor, a creature that had consumed three previous users of One for All and grown into something that barely fit inside a human shape anymore. The fight had lasted 11 hours. Izuku had won. He was certain of that. He remembered the exact moment, the feeling of his fist going all the way through, every successor's powers singing in unison for the final time, and then a light so complete that it had no edges. And then this. He stood up. His legs held. Good. The stone beneath him was part of what looked like a ruined plaza, ancient, ceremonial, circular, with carvings worn down to ghosts of their original shapes. At the center, where he'd been lying, a single carved symbol remained legible. He crouched to look at it. Something like a crown, but the spires of it curved outward and downward like the teeth of a predator's jaw. Around it, worn but readable, were characters in a script he'd never studied. He could read it anyway. That was new. Here rests the throne of the sovereign of beasts. Vacant. Waiting. Huh, Izuku said to the empty forest. The forest didn't answer. He hadn't expected it to. But something in the tree line shifted, a presence, not hostile, just aware, and then was gone. He filed it away and started walking. The town materialized out of the tree line about 20 minutes later, which told him either the forest was smaller than it looked or he was moving faster than he thought. Both possibilities felt equally plausible given the morning he was having. It looked like a normal Japanese town. That was both reassuring and deeply suspicious. Izuku had learned a long time ago that normal-looking things in strange places deserved more scrutiny than obviously strange ones. He walked the perimeter of the main shopping street first, hands in his pockets, watching. People moved with the ordinary rhythms of morning, someone unlocking a bakery, a salaryman speedwalking with his phone at his ear, a cluster of students in school uniforms arguing about something at a crosswalk. Normal. All of it normal. Except. He noticed the girl at the bus stop first because she was crying quietly into her sleeve in the specific way people cry when they're trying very hard not to be noticed. Mid-20s, office clothes, a tear-streaked face she kept turning toward the wall. Unremarkable, except that about 4 feet behind her, half dissolved into the shadow cast by the bus shelter's roof, something crouched. It wasn't human. It had the rough outline of one, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but the proportions were wrong, the limbs too long, the mouth too wide, and where its eyes should have been there were just 2 points of cold amber light floating in darkness. It watched the crying woman with the specific patience of something that had learned to wait. Izuku's feet stopped. Every instinct he'd spent years honing said the same thing in unison, threat. But more than that, something deeper than his training, something rooted in whatever he now was, looked at that creature and categorized it without effort. Stray devil. Recently separated from its master. Hunger overriding restraint. Dangerous to humans. Responds to hierarchy. He didn't question how he knew that. He crossed the street. The stray devil's amber eyes tracked to him the moment he stepped off the curb. The woman at the bus stop didn't notice anything. The other pedestrians moved around Izuku in the glazed way that told him whatever perception filter was at work here, it worked on everyone but him. "Hey," Izuku said, stopping about 3 meters from the shadow. He kept his voice conversational. "She's not for you." The creature tilted its head. Its mouth opened, too wide, pulling at the corners, and a sound came out that was halfway between a growl and a word. Territorial. Annoyed. Mine. No, Izuku said simply. He hadn't raised his voice. Hadn't shifted his stance. But something happened in that moment that he felt more than understood, like a frequency change, a depth that entered his voice and his presence that had nothing to do with volume. The air between him and the stray devil seemed to thicken. The creature's amber eyes flickered. Its crouch deepened and then, almost against its will, it lowered. Not bowing. Not quite. But something adjacent to it. Something instinctive. Responds to hierarchy, he'd thought. And apparently the hierarchy had opinions about him. The stray devil held that position for 3 seconds, then dissolved sideways into shadow and was gone. The bus arrived. The woman wiped her face, picked up her bag, and got on without ever looking back. Izuku stood on the empty sidewalk and stared at where the creature had been. "Okay," he said softly. "So it's that kind of world." He spent the rest of the morning learning the town's geography and the afternoon learning its rhythms. By evening he had confirmed several things. The town was called Kuil, it was attached to a prestigious academy, and it had a supernatural community dense enough that once you knew what to look for, you saw it everywhere, in the shimmer of warding runes carved under park benches, in the way certain blocks felt subtly pressurized, in the 2 girls he passed near the academy gates whose beauty was precisely, unmistakably beyond the human average in the way that spoke of something other than genetics. Devils. Young ones. Part of someone's peerage. He knew that word too, the same way he'd known what the stray had been. Like the knowledge had always been there and he just needed to arrive somewhere that made it relevant. He found a place to sleep, an empty traditional-style house at the edge of a residential block that had a for rent sign on the gate and an unlocked back entrance, which solved his immediate problem, and sat in the empty main room in the dark and tried to think clearly. He was in a new world. He had a new body, or rather his old body rebuilt. He had knowledge he hadn't earned through study. He apparently had authority over supernatural creatures by virtue of existing, which was both useful and deeply unsettling. He had no money, no documentation, no contacts, and no clear understanding of the political landscape he'd landed in the middle of. He also wasn't afraid. That surprised him, actually. After everything, after all the years of running toward danger with his body falling apart, after the accumulated weight of every fight, every near death, every person he couldn't save in time, he'd expected fear to be his default setting. Instead there was something quieter and more focused. Not peace exactly. More like the feeling before a match when everything irrelevant has already burned away. He was starting over. He'd been given something he hadn't asked for and hadn't earned yet. But he was alive, and he was still himself, and those 2 facts together meant he could work with everything else. He pulled his knees up, pressed his back against the wall, and slept. He was woken at 2 in the morning by the sound of something dying. Not metaphorically, actual sounds of combat, the crack and impact of supernatural forces being traded at high speed, close enough that the windows of the empty house rattled in their frames. Izuku was on his feet before he was fully conscious, moving toward the door on pure reflex, and then he stopped himself halfway down the hallway. Think first. Old lesson. Often ignored. Try it. He listened. 3 distinct power signatures, he could feel them, which was still new and strange but increasingly useful, 1 large and chaotic, 2 smaller and organized. The large one was another stray, bigger than the morning's encounter, the kind that had been loose long enough to get creative about it. The 2 smaller ones were working together, coordinated, pulling at it from different angles. Fighting it. Holding their own. Not winning. He went outside anyway. The street 3 blocks over looked like someone had taken an ordinary residential road and run it through a blender. Pavement was cracked in overlapping patterns, a telephone pole was down, and the air smelled like ozone and something older, earthier, that his new instincts categorized as devil energy being pushed past its comfortable limit. The stray devil was enormous, 3 meters at the shoulder, vaguely canine in shape but built like something that had eaten a wolf and then kept eating, layers of black-purple flesh and too many joints and a mane of what looked like condensed shadow. It was bleeding from a dozen cuts, which meant the 2 people fighting it were doing real damage. But it was also, clearly, getting angrier. The 2 people fighting it were a girl with long crimson hair and a school uniform that shouldn't have looked functional in a combat situation but somehow did, and a boy with brown hair and a terrified expression that hadn't stopped him from throwing himself between the stray and 3 younger kids who were pressed against a garden wall, frozen. The girl was good. Better than good, she moved like someone trained from childhood, her attacks sharp and deliberate, bolts of deep red-black energy that cut the stray wherever they landed. But the stray's regeneration was faster than her damage output, and she had to know it. She kept her eyes moving, kept calculating, but her breathing was getting ragged at the edges. The boy, her knight, something told Izuku, peerage terminology arriving uninvited, was buying her time by being an absolute menace. Fast, recklessly fast, darting in and out of the stray's reach, making it turn and turn again. Burning energy he didn't have to spare. Izuku walked into the street. The stray noticed him first. It swung its massive head toward him and went very still, amber eyes wide, and for just a moment the whole scene paused, the girl and the knight both tracking the stray's reaction, confused by it. "It's all right," Izuku said, addressing the stray the way you'd address anything that was afraid and dangerous because of it. "You're done here." "Who?" the girl started. The stray made a sound. Not aggression. Something closer to a whimper. Then it did something Izuku hadn't quite expected, it sat. Haunches dropping to the cracked pavement, enormous body settling, head lowering until its chin nearly touched the ground. The shadow mane went flat. Every line of it communicated the same wordless thing the stray at the bus stop had communicated that morning. Hierarchy recognized. Submission offered. The girl with the crimson hair stared at it. Then at Izuku. Then back at it. "What did you just do?" she said. "I'm honestly not entirely sure," Izuku said, which was true. "But it's not going to attack you. Give me a second." He walked to the stray. Up close it was even larger than it had seemed, and it smelled like old earth and blood and the particular bitterness of a creature that had been lost for a very long time. He reached up, he had to stand on his toes slightly, and placed one hand on the side of its enormous jaw. Something passed between them. Not words. More like information, the kind that bypasses language entirely. The stray had been a lesser devil once, a familiar without a master, cut loose when its contractor died 2 years ago. It had been hungry and afraid and had learned that aggression was the only thing that kept larger threats away. It had not actually wanted to hurt anyone tonight. It had wanted, in the wordless way of things that think in appetite and instinct, to belong somewhere. "Okay," Izuku said quietly. "Okay. You're done hurting people. You understand that?" The stray made a low sound. Agreement. Then go. Go deep into the forest east of town, there's old territory there, it's unclaimed. Stay there. Don't come near the populated areas again. If you listen to that, nothing will come for you. He stepped back. The stray rose, turned, and moved, not running, not fleeing, just moving with the deliberate purpose of something that had been given direction, and within moments it had dissolved into the shadows at the edge of the street and was gone. The three kids against the wall bolted the moment it disappeared. Smart. Izuku turned around. The girl with the crimson hair was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, not quite suspicion, not quite fascination, something that sat between them and tipped toward both. She was striking. The kind of striking that had nothing to do with aesthetics and everything to do with presence. Her eyes were the blue-green of deep water, and right now they were very focused on him. Beside her, the knight, who was apparently named Yudo Kiba based on the way one of the fleeing kids had screamed his name, had his sword still in hand and an expression that was considerably more straightforwardly wary. That stray, the girl said carefully, was a Class B threat. I've been tracking it for 4 days. It took down 2 of my pieces during that time. She paused. You walked up to it and it sat down. Yeah, Izuku said. You're not human. I'm definitely human, he said. Then, after a moment, mostly. Something shifted in her expression. Not alarm. More like a door opening onto a larger room than expected. I'm Rias Gremory, she said. This is my territory. He met her eyes. Izuku Midoriya. I just got here. I know, she said. I felt you arrive last night. I just couldn't locate you. She tilted her head slightly, the motion precise, aristocratic, the gesture of someone used to being the most significant person in any room. What are you? I don't have a complete answer to that yet, Izuku said honestly. I'm working on it. She held his gaze for a long moment. He didn't look away. Not aggressively, he wasn't trying to challenge her in her own territory, that would be stupid and rude, but he also didn't have anything to prove by flinching, and she seemed like someone who'd noticed the difference. You should come with me, she said finally. Is that a question? The corner of her mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile but was in the same neighborhood. It's a very polite order. I appreciate the effort, Izuku said. Sure. The Gremory household's Japanese estate, which was absolutely not what it appeared to be from outside, the interior being at least 3 times larger than any physical structure on that lot could logically contain, was the kind of place that announced power without shouting about it. The architecture was a confident blend of traditional and something older, the kind of old that predated architecture as a concept, stone foundations that had been here in some form since before the building above them existed. Izuku noticed all of it and said nothing, cataloging quietly. The rest of the peerage was assembled in the main room when they arrived. He took them in fast, the vice president with the long black hair and the smile that was working too hard, doing its job of disarming too visibly to be spontaneous, Akino, he'd learn in the next 30 seconds. A small girl in the corner with silver hair and cat-like features who looked at him like she was considering biting him, Kaneko. A blonde in a nun's habit who looked genuinely alarmed by his arrival and then immediately tried to hide the alarm under a gentle smile, Asia. Kiba, who he'd already met, still carrying a measured suspicion that Izuku actually respected. And then, by the window, a girl with short blue hair and a kind of body language that said recently arrived somewhere new and hasn't decided if she's comfortable yet, Xenovia, though he didn't have her name yet. She was looking at him the way someone looks at a problem they're not sure is interesting or annoying. Everyone, Rias said, with the composure of someone who'd made unexpected arrivals seem routine, this is Izuku Midoriya. He subdued the stray that I've been tracking. She paused, and something moved through her voice that was more personal than the formal introduction. Without a sacred gear. Without devil powers I could identify. By talking to it. Talking to it, Kaneko said flatly. She said it the way you'd repeat a sentence you'd misheard, hoping the context would resolve on its own. It sat down, Kiba said. Still processing. Like a dog. Stray devils don't do that, Akino said. Her smile had become something more genuine and therefore more complicated. That's not a thing that happens. And yet, Rias said. Izuku stood in the center of the room and let them process. He didn't try to explain himself, didn't volunteer information to fill the silence. One of the things years of hero work had taught him was that sometimes the most effective thing you could do in a room full of capable people was simply exist clearly and let them form their own questions. The questions were more useful than answers he'd pre-prepared. It was Asia who spoke first, which tracked. Are you hungry? She said. I could make tea. Or, tea would be great, actually, Izuku said, and she brightened immediately and vanished toward the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd been waiting for a way to be helpful. Where are you from? Rias asked. She'd settled into a chair, her chair, the largest one, positioned naturally at the head of the room, with the ease of someone who'd never had to think about where to sit in any room she occupied. Somewhere else, Izuku said. He sat on the edge of a low couch, elbows on knees. Different world, I think. I don't know exactly how I got here or who sent me, if anyone did. I woke up in the ruins east of town last night. He said it plainly, without drama, the way you'd describe missing a bus. There was a carved stone at the center. It said something about a beast king. I could read it, even though I don't know the language. The silence that followed was different from the previous one. Heavier. Rias's expression had changed in a way that was subtle and therefore significant. Akino's smile had gone very still. Kiba had straightened slightly. Even Kaneko, who had been performing aggressive disinterest until this point, had gone still in the focused way of a cat who's just heard something in the walls. Say that again, Rias said quietly. Beast King. That's what the inscription said. Sovereign of beasts, throne vacant, waiting. He met her eyes. Does that mean something to you? She took a moment. Several moments. Then she stood, crossed to a bookshelf that took up most of one wall, and pulled a volume that was so old it made the shelf look new by comparison. She found the page without looking, which told him she'd known where it was, which told him this wasn't the first time she'd thought about this. She brought it to him and held it open. The page showed the same crown symbol he'd seen on the stone, rendered in careful ink, surrounded by text in multiple scripts. Below it, a passage in modern Japanese, annotated in the margins in red, her handwriting. The Beast King is not a title granted by any faction or bloodline. It predates the three factions. It predates the current devil hierarchy. The last confirmed king claimed the title approximately 3,000 years ago and ruled no territory, swore no allegiance, and acknowledged no authority above their own. The standing orders of the 72 pillars regarding the Beast King have not changed in 3,000 years. If one manifests, neutralize them before they consolidate power. Izuku read it. Then he looked up at her. Well, he said, that's clarifying. There's a faction, Rias said, sitting again, her voice careful, led by a pillar devil named Vritraselam. He's old. Intelligent. He has been, as far as I know, monitoring the ruins east of town for the last century because certain divinatory traditions predicted a new king would manifest there within a 200-year window. She looked at him steadily. You arrived last night. He will know by morning. Izuku thought about that. How long do I have before it becomes an active problem? Days. Maybe a week if he wants to confirm what you are before moving. She paused. Possibly less, if he's already confirmed it. From the kitchen, Asia reappeared with tea, moving with careful hands, the cups arranged on a tray with the precision of someone who found comfort in doing small things correctly. She offered Izuku the first cup. He took it and thanked her, and she smiled with her whole face the way some people do when they haven't quite lost the habit of being grateful for small kindnesses. He drank the tea. It was good. That helped, somehow, not the taste specifically, but the fact that in the middle of a genuinely complicated situation, there was good tea and a girl who'd thought to make it. "Thank you, Asia," he said. She turned pink and sat down quickly. "So," Kaneko said. She'd moved at some point without him noticing, which impressed him slightly. She was now sitting on the arm of the couch 2 feet from him, close enough to make a point. She was staring at him with the flat, evaluating regard of someone who has decided that polite indirection is a waste of everyone's time. "Are you actually the Beast King, or are you just something that woke up in the right ruins?" He looked at her. She didn't blink. "I don't know the complete answer to that yet," he said. But that stray didn't sit because it was confused. She held his gaze for another 3 seconds. Then she made a small sound that wasn't quite dismissal, more like a provisional verdict, and looked away. Xenovia, who had been silent this entire time, spoke up from her position by the window. "If Ritra's forces come for you," she said, "what's your plan?" He looked at her. She'd asked it without preamble, no diplomatic softening, just the question at the center of the situation. He appreciated that. "I don't have one yet," he said. "I've been in this world for about 14 hours. That's not reassuring." "No," he agreed, "it's not. I'm working on it." He sent a stray Class B to submission without raising his energy output above resting levels, Kiba said, apparently having completed some internal deliberation. "I monitored it. He didn't do anything I could quantify. It just responded to him." "That's how it works," Izuku said, more to himself than anyone else. He was still figuring out the edges of it. "It's not force. It's more like recognition. They respond to what I am, not what I do." "And what you are," Rias said, watching him with that ocean-deep regard, "is the first Beast King in 3,000 years. A pause. Without a territory, a faction, a peerage, or any political standing in this world." "That's about right. And you're taking all of this," she said, with what sounded almost like reluctant admiration, remarkably calmly. He thought about the last 11 hours of a battle that had broken 4 of his limbs and burned through every stored unit of one for all he had left. He thought about what it felt like to hit so hard that the impact traveled through the earth. He thought about waking up afterward in a world that wasn't his. "I've had worse mornings," he said. Rias studied him for a long moment. Then she made a decision. He could see the moment she made it, the slight shift in how she held herself, and set down her tea. "You'll stay here tonight," she said. "You have no money, no documentation, and Vritra's people will have your location triangulated by dawn. I have warding on this property that will buy us time." "I'm not your peerage," he said. "Not a challenge. Just clarity." "No," she agreed. "You're not." Something moved through her expression that he couldn't quite categorize yet. "But you're in my territory, you handled a problem that was damaging my people, and you appear to be in immediate danger from a faction that I have significant reasons to oppose regardless of your involvement." A pause. "Consider it hospitality with mutual benefit." He thought about it for exactly as long as it took to finish his tea. He had no better options. The territory warding was genuinely useful, and he'd learned a long time ago that pride about accepting help was just another way of making yourself weaker. "All right," he said. "Thank you." Asia beamed. Akino's smile became several degrees more genuine. Kaneko went back to looking at nothing in particular, which he was starting to suspect was her version of approval. Kiba nodded once. Xenovia looked out the window and said, "Can you fight? Actually fight, not just talk things into submission." "Yeah," Izuku said. "We'll see," she said, and the way she said it was a promise rather than a threat, which was an interesting distinction. Rias watched him above the rim of her teacup, and said nothing, and watched, and thought something she didn't share with the room. He was given a guest room at the far end of the east hallway, clean, sparse, a futon rolled out on tatami floors, a window that looked out over the walled garden. He sat at the window for a while after everyone else had gone to sleep, watching the garden, feeling the layered wards on the property the way you feel a temperature change, not sharp, just there, a baseline of awareness. Somewhere out in the town, he could feel things moving. Not threatening, just the ordinary churn of a place that had more supernatural density than the human population knew about. A few low-level devil signatures, familiar in the vague way of things that belonged here. Something angelic, distant, like a light at the end of a long corridor. And at the very edge of his range, something old and cold and watchful that didn't announce itself but didn't quite hide itself either. Patient. Calibrating. Vritra, some instinct said. Or something of his. Izuku noted it, filed it, and turned away from the window. He lay down on the futon and stared at the ceiling and thought about the carved symbol on the stone, that crown with its downward curved teeth. He thought about the fact that the last person to hold this title had existed 3,000 years ago and had apparently been threatening enough that the entire devil hierarchy's standing orders were still set to neutralize on sight. He thought about Rias' Grimoire and the way she'd pulled that book without looking, which meant she'd been waiting for this possibility for longer than tonight. He thought about the girl who'd made him tea when he had nothing and knew no one. He thought about Xenovia's "we'll see," the challenge in it, and underneath the challenge, something else. Curiosity. The genuine kind. Outside, the purple-threaded sky was beginning, very slowly, to shift toward dawn. The arterial red trees at the edge of the garden moved in a wind he couldn't feel from inside. The carved stone was east of here, silent, patient, waiting with the long patience of 3,000 years. Izuku closed his eyes. Beast King, the world seemed to whisper around him, not unkindly. I know, he thought back. Give me a minute. And for the first time in what felt like a very long life, he slept without dreaming of the next fight. Chapter 2, Teeth and Contracts. The morning started with Xenovia trying to hit him with a sword. Not metaphorically. An actual sword, not Durandal, he'd learn later, just a training blade she'd conjured from her own energy, dense and heavy and swung with the kind of committed force that said she'd made the decision before she'd fully woken up. He was in the garden doing the closest thing to a warm-up routine he could manage without knowing what his new body's ceiling was, which mostly involved stretching and feeling out the edges of whatever lived in his bones now, when she came around the corner of the east wing at 6 in the morning and looked at him and said, "Good. You're up." Then she attacked. He moved. The blade passed close enough to ruffle his hair, and he felt the edge of it the way you feel a car passing too fast on a narrow road, wind and weight and the specific awareness of how badly it could have gone. He turned the momentum of his dodge into distance, ending up 3 meters back, facing her. "Good morning," he said. "You dodged," she said, like this was information she needed to catalog. "You swung a sword at me. I wanted to see your reflexes." She circled left, the training blade held easy at her side, her footwork precise. Morning light caught the blue of her hair and the flat, analytical focus in her eyes. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even particularly aggressive. She was running an assessment, and she'd apparently decided the most efficient methodology was trying to take his head off. "Rias won't tell me what you are," she said, "to form my own opinion." "Smart of her," Izuku said. He kept moving, tracking her, circling with his body without mirroring it, different angles, staying unpredictable. "I would have told you if you'd asked. This is faster." She came in again, not full force, testing, probing, looking for his response pattern. High strike, transitioning to a low sweep, the combination clean and practiced. He stepped inside the first and over the second, close enough that she had to adjust, and backed off again before she could use the closeness against him. She stopped. Looked at him differently than before. "You know how to fight," she said. "Little bit. Martial arts." Something like that. He hadn't activated anything, no Beast King resonance, no whatever it was that made Stray sit down, just footwork and pattern recognition and 11 years of getting hit until he learned not to be where the hit was going. "Are we done, or is there more data you need?" She considered him for a moment. Then she planted the training blade point down in the garden gravel and leaned on the pommel and said, "Why did you turn Rias down?" He blinked. I haven't turned her down. She hasn't asked me anything yet. She will. And you'll turn her down. Xenovia said it with the certainty of someone who'd already run the logic. She'll ask you to join her peerage and you'll say no. I could see it last night. The way you said I'm not your peerage before she'd even suggested it. A pause. Why? The directness of it was almost refreshing. He'd spent the last several years surrounded by people who knew how to talk around things, politicians and pro-heroes and villains who'd learned that indirection was a form of power. Xenovia Quarta, apparently, had not gotten that memo. Because I just got here, he said. Because I don't understand enough about how this world works to make a contract I can't walk back. And because, he stopped, found the honest answer, and used it, because the last time I let myself be defined by someone else's system, it took me a decade to figure out which parts of me were actually mine. She was quiet for a moment. The garden was very still around them, morning light just beginning to warm the stone. That's a real answer, she said finally. Not approvingly, just noting it. Like she'd expected deflection and was recalibrating. You asked a real question. She pulled the training blade from the gravel and dismissed it, the energy dissolving like morning mist. I'm a knight in Rias's peerage, she said. Former exorcist. I defected from the church because my leadership used me and then lied about it. So I understand what you said. She looked at him directly, without the filter of the assessment she'd been running. I don't trust easily. But I respect someone who knows what they're doing and does it anyway. And I wanted to see if you were worth respecting. She turned to go inside. You move well. Your instincts are good. You don't panic. Over her shoulder, breakfast is at 7. Asia makes eggs. She disappeared around the corner of the east wing, and Izuku stood in the garden in the morning quiet and thought that this world was going to be very interesting. Asia did make eggs. Scrambled, careful, the kind of eggs that are made by someone who understands that breakfast is a way of taking care of people. She also made rice and miso soup and set a full place for Izuku without asking whether he'd be joining them, which was a small gesture that landed heavier than she probably intended. The whole peerage ate together, which turned out to be a dynamic that told him a great deal about all of them in a short time. Kiba ate with the quiet efficiency of someone running on a tight schedule and too much training. Kaneko ate with the focused dedication of someone for whom food is one of the primary joys available in a complex world, which he respected. Akino held court from the corner of the table with fluid grace and said charming things that were never quite as light as they appeared, like water that looks shallow until you try to stand in it. Rias ate last, arriving at the table with her hair still slightly damp from the shower, wearing a different uniform with the careless authority of someone who changes the meaning of clothing just by being inside it. She looked at him across the table with those deep water eyes and said, "Sleep well." "Better than expected," he said. "You have good wards. Ravel helped me design the outermost layer. She's annoying about credit but she's talented." A pause. "There's a school day today. Ko Academy. My peerage attends as part of our cover. It would be useful for you to come. I don't have enrollment paperwork." The corner of her mouth curved. "I'm Rias Gremory," she said. "I have the chairman of the board's number. The paperwork will be ready by the time we arrive." That was said without arrogance. Just the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who has never had to think about whether the mechanisms of the world will accommodate them, because they always have. He filed that away, not critically, just as information. Understanding someone meant understanding what they'd never had to doubt. "All right," he said. "But I'm not wearing the uniform." She looked at him. He looked at her. He was wearing the same dark clothes as yesterday, which she had definitely noticed and was definitely formulating an opinion about. "Fine," she said, which surprised him slightly. "For today." Ko Academy looked exactly like what it was, a prestigious, immaculately maintained institution that had the specific atmosphere of a place where everyone knows the rules are somewhat optional if you're the right kind of person. Izuku walked in beside Rias and felt the shift in the school's social gravity immediately, heads turning, conversations dipping, the particular attention that followed her everywhere resolving into the more complicated attention of wondering who he was and why he was next to her. He'd been a public figure once. A hero with a ranked number and a recognizable costume and a name that people invoked in emergencies. He'd learned to work inside public attention without being changed by it. This felt different, not more intense, but different in kind, because the eyes on him now weren't citizen eyes or media eyes. Several of them belonged to people with the specific quality of supernatural awareness, the subtle pressure of devils in their human presentation mode, watching him the way predators watch something that's wandered into unfamiliar territory. Watching to see if he'd notice. He noticed. He didn't acknowledge it. There are more devil-aligned students here than I'd expect for a school this size, he said quietly, to Rias. Kuo is unusual, she said, matching his volume. The town itself has a higher supernatural density. There's an unofficial arrangement, several noble families maintain presence here, and the school provides cover and community. My family and the Citri family are the primary holders. She glanced at him. You can feel them? Yeah. Without effort. Without trying, he confirmed. It's ambient. He searched for the right analogy, like being in a room and knowing where everyone is without looking. She processed this and said nothing, but the quality of her silence was thoughtful rather than dismissive. He was assigned to their class, which he suspected had involved a phone call that lasted approximately 90 seconds. The teacher introduced him as a transfer student, which was technically accurate if you were comfortable with the word transfer doing a lot of heavy lifting. He sat in the empty desk near the window, always near the window, old habit, sight lines, and spent the first period doing two things simultaneously, following enough of the actual lesson to not look completely lost, and quietly mapping the subtle signatures of everyone in the building. Most of the students were human and completely unaware of anything. A cluster near the front of the class had the quiet, contained energy of Rias's peerage members. 2 students 3 rows over had signatures he didn't recognize immediately, cleaner than devil energy, sharper, like a blade where devil power was more like a flame. Fallen angel affiliation, something suggested. Low level. Monitoring. He didn't move. Didn't look at them. But he noted it. After first period, in the hallway between classes, Aquino appeared at his shoulder with the fluid timing of someone who'd chosen their moment. You've been very quiet, she said. Her smile was at its most performative, that polished warmth that was absolutely a construction and absolutely effective anyway. Most people who transfer here spend the first day being overwhelmed by Rias's social orbit. I'm pretty hard to overwhelm, he said. I've noticed. She fell into step beside him. You have a way of being very present and very unreachable at the same time. It's unusual. He glanced at her sideways. Is that an assessment, or a complaint? A compliment, she said, and this time the smile shifted slightly, lost a layer of its professional gloss and became something more real underneath. Briefly. Then it was back. Rias is going to talk to you today. After school. She's been deciding since last night. Deciding what? Whether to ask you to join her peerage or to ask you something else. Aquino looked straight ahead, her voice casual, the information delivered beneath the surface of the conversation like something slipped into a pocket. She's not sure which is the better strategic move. Which means she's actually not sure which is the better personal move, and she doesn't quite realize that yet. He turned to look at her properly. She met his gaze with that bright, layered smile. You're more perceptive than you let on, he said. She said pleasantly. We all have our depths. And she turned off into the next hallway, unhurried, leaving him to consider what she'd given him and why. The conversation happened in the Occult Research Club room, which was the Gremory Peerage's base of operations, dressed up in the clothing of a school club with the specific humor of people who are very powerful and have learned to find the administrative mundanity of human institutions genuinely funny. The room was large, lined with bookshelves, furnished with mismatched comfort, and smelled like old paper and the particular warmth of a space that's actually used. He arrived to find the full peerage there, plus Rias standing by the window with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Everyone else was doing something, Kiba with a book, Asia with her hands folded in her lap, Kaneko with a bag of chips she wasn't sharing with anyone, Xenovia sharpening something that technically wasn't a weapon but looked like one. Akino poured tea with a serenity that said she knew exactly what was about to happen. The atmosphere had the quality of a room that's been having a conversation that stopped right before you entered. You wanted to talk, Izuku said. Sit down, Rias said. Not unkindly. He sat. She turned from the window and looked at him with that measuring regard, and he could see she'd spent the day organizing what she was going to say. I want to be honest with you, she said. About what I know, what I want, and what I think the situation requires. All right, he said. Vritra knows you're here. I received confirmation this morning through a contact in the Pillar families. He hasn't moved yet, but he's made inquiries. Careful ones, which means he's not rushing, which means he's confident. She paused. He's going to come for you. The question is when and in what form, direct force, political maneuvering, or using proxies to destabilize you before you've consolidated anything. I know, Izuku said. I felt something at the edge of your wards last night. The room's attention sharpened. Rias set down her tea. You didn't mention that. I didn't want to alarm anyone until I had more information. He met her eyes. It wasn't aggressive. It was reconnaissance. If it had been a genuine threat I'd have woken you. You should have told me regardless, she said, and there was something in her voice that was less about the information and more about the fact of it, the instinct toward control that he recognized as the reflex of someone who'd been responsible for other people for a long time and had learned that information asymmetry gets people hurt. You're right, he said simply. I'll tell you anything like that going forward. She seemed slightly thrown by the lack of argument. She recovered quickly. I'm going to ask you something and I need you to hear all of it before you answer. All right. I want you to join my peerage. She said it clean, no preamble or diplomatic softening, which he respected. Not as a piece, not a rook or a bishop or any named position in the standard configuration. I'm asking you to be part of this group as something we'd have to define together. With full autonomy. No command hierarchy, no obligations you don't choose. Just, she paused, found the word, alignment. Common cause. The room was very quiet. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the room, at Kiba, who was no longer reading, at Asia, who had her hands pressed together, at Kaneko, who was watching him with the unblinking attention she'd been withholding until now, at Xenovia, who had stopped the pretense of doing anything else, at Akino, whose smile had gentled to something that was just waiting. You're not asking me to be a piece, he said slowly. No. You're asking me to be something the peerage system doesn't have a category for. Yes. He thought about it. He thought about what she described, autonomy, no hierarchy, common cause, and he thought about what he'd said to Xenovia that morning about being defined by someone else's system. He thought about the fact that he'd been in this world for less than 24 hours and he was already at the center of a political situation that had been building for a century. No, he said. The silence was a different shape now. I heard your terms, he said, before she could respond. And I believe you mean them. But here's the problem, he leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, if I join your peerage in any form, the political framing is that I'm under your protection. That you've brought me into your house. That means when Vritra comes, and he will, it becomes a conflict between House Gremory and Vritra's faction. You become a target. Rias opened her mouth. I'm not finished, he said, gently. She stopped. Something moved through her expression that was surprised at being stopped and not angry about it, which told him something. If I'm outside your peerage, genuinely independent, not a piece, not affiliated, then moving against me directly is politically different. It's not an attack on your house, it's an attack on a free agent. And free agents have different protections under whatever the devil equivalent of international law is. He looked at her. Don't they? The pause that followed lasted approximately 5 seconds. The unaligned accord, Kiba said quietly, from the corner. Entities not affiliated with any faction have specific protections against coordinated hostile action by factions, provided they haven't committed hostile acts first. He met Izuku's eyes. It's rarely used because most entities of significant power align quickly. But technically it means Vritra can't bring the full weight of his faction down on me without violating an accord that the 72 pillars ratified, Izuku said. Which forces him to use proxies and individual actors, which is harder to coordinate, which gives us more time. The room processed this. You read our legal precedent in one night, Rias said. She wasn't asking. I read the book you left on the side table in the guest hall. It was open to the relevant section. He looked at her steadily. I think you left it there deliberately. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I wasn't sure you'd read it. You were hoping I would. I was hoping you were the kind of person who would, she said, and the distinction she was drawing was specific and personal and honest. Yes. He sat back. I'll work with you. I'll share information, I'll coordinate on threats, I'll help you if something comes for your people because that's just who I am. But I stay unaligned. For now. He met her gaze. When I understand this world better, when I've figured out what this title actually means and what I actually want, we can revisit it. Does that work? The room seemed to hold its breath. Rias looked at him for a long time. He could see her turning it over, the tactical logic, the personal implication, the weight of someone who'd offered something real and been given a not yet instead of a yes or no. He watched her decide that not yet was not never, and he watched her decide that was enough. That works, she said. For now. Kaneko ate a chip. The sound of it was somehow the loudest thing in the room. Great, Aquino said warmly, and started refilling cups like this had been a pleasant social occasion all along. The trouble arrived 2 hours later, which felt about right. He was in the school library, genuinely, actually reading, because the library had a collection of historical texts about the supernatural world that was suspiciously comprehensive for a regular high school, and he had a lot of catching up to do, when his ambient awareness registered the 2 signatures he'd flagged that morning. The fallen angel adjacent ones. They were close now, and moving with the directed purpose of people who had decided it was time to stop just watching. He closed his book, set it carefully back on the shelf, and walked toward the door. They were waiting in the hallway. 2 young men, maybe 19, wearing the school uniform with the slightly too perfect fit of people who'd prepared a disguise rather than lived in it. One tall, one shorter, both with that sharp, clean energy signature he'd noted. They looked at him and dropped the human presentation simultaneously, which was either confidence or poor discipline. Izuku Midoriya, the tall one said. You're being observed. Lord Vritra requests that you present yourself for assessment at, no, Izuku said. They blinked. The request is, not a request, Izuku said. I know. Tell him no anyway. The shorter one's expression shifted to something less diplomatic. You don't understand the position you're in. You arrived unaffiliated, with no standing, no faction, no protections. Lord Vritra is offering you an evaluation before what? Izuku asked pleasantly. Before he decides whether I'm useful or dangerous. He looked at them both, taking his time, and let the thing he'd been keeping mostly quiet settle into his presence. Not aggressively. Just, fully. The way you draw a breath and let your shoulders drop. Tell me something. Do you both actually believe in what you're doing here, or are you proxies who were given a job and a script? The tall one had gone a shade paler. His companion was holding very still. Because if you believe in it, Izuku continued, with genuine curiosity, I'd like to understand why. Vritra's faction has been suppressing knowledge of the Beast King for 3,000 years because the previous holder threatened the power structure. I get the logic. But that's not a moral position, that's maintenance. And I'm not a threat to anyone who doesn't make themselves a threat first. He looked at them. You can tell him that. The shorter one opened his mouth. Also tell him the unaligned accord applies, and if these semi-official visits continue, I'll be filing a formal notice with the 72 pillars within the week. He smiled pleasantly. Have a good evening. He walked back to the library. Behind him, he heard them leave, not immediately, there was a moment of frozen consultation, and then their signatures moved away quickly. He sat back down, retrieved his book, and found his page. 3 minutes later, Kaneko appeared in the seat across the table from him, wrapped around a new bag of chips, as if she'd always been there. Were those Vritra's people? She asked quietly. Advanced scouts. Feeling out my response. And your response was to give them a legal citation and send them home. She ate a chip. Watched him. Rias is going to be annoyed she didn't see that. Rias will understand the logic. Sure. A pause. What I want to know is whether the legal strategy is your actual plan or just your opening move. He looked up from his book. She was watching him with those flat, serious eyes, the chip bag crinkling softly between her small hands. Opening move, he said. Something in her expression settled, like a question that had been bothering her had just found its answer. She ate another chip and didn't say anything else, but she also didn't leave, and they sat together in the quiet library with the late afternoon light coming through the high windows while he read about 3,000 years of devil history and she worked through her snack with the focused satisfaction of someone comfortable with silence. The evening brought something he hadn't anticipated, paperwork. Specifically, Rias had arranged not just school enrollment but an actual residential registration, a student profile, and a stipend from what she described as a peerage support fund that covered guests and associates. It was sitting on the table in the occult club room when they returned, neat and organized, representing several hours of effort on someone's part. He looked at it for a moment. Then at her. You did this before I said no, he said. I did this before I asked you, she confirmed, without apology. Whatever you decided, you needed documentation and resources. You can't operate without them. This isn't leverage. It's not, she agreed. It's just practical. You can tear it up if you want. But then you'll spend the next week sorting out residency paperwork instead of studying Vritra's faction patterns, which strikes me as a waste of your time. He looked at the paperwork. He looked at her. Thank you, he said, and picked it up. Something moved through her expression, brief, genuine, quickly composed, and she looked away toward the window with the careful attention of someone organizing their thoughts. Across the room, Asia made a small, pleased sound and immediately tried to cover it by asking if anyone wanted dinner. Everyone did. That night, he stood in the garden again, later than the previous night, when the house had settled into sleep around him. He stood where the ward's outermost layer created the thinnest barrier and he pushed his awareness outward, carefully, feeling for Vritra's presence the way you feel for a wall in the dark. There. Same position as last night, maybe slightly closer. Still patient, still cold. But now there was a second quality to it, something he hadn't felt the previous night. It took him a moment to identify it. Respect. Reluctant, measured, not at all pleased about itself, but present. The proxies had delivered his message. Vritra had heard the unaligned accord citation and the legal threat and he'd recalibrated. It wasn't victory. It was barely even progress. It was one step on a road that was very long and had very uncertain footing. But it was something, the acknowledgement that he wasn't going to be pushed or panicked, that he'd arrived in this world with nothing and in 48 hours had already made himself into a problem that required careful handling rather than immediate suppression. He thought about the crown carved into the stone with its downward curving teeth. Waiting, it had said. 3,000 years of waiting, for someone who could hold the title without being destroyed by it or deformed by it. Not a throne of domination, he understood that more clearly now. The beast submitted to him not because he was the strongest but because he was the most coherent. The calmest. The one most able to hold the center when everything else was pulling apart. He'd spent his whole first life being a vessel for power that came from someone else. This was different. This was his. Not gifted, not inherited through a complicated chain of tragedy and sacrifice. Just, his. He didn't know what to do with that yet. But he was starting to feel the shape of it. Behind him, the house was warm and full of sleeping people who'd taken him in without any obligation to do so, because Rias Gremory was, underneath all the aristocratic composure and the political calculation, a person who made room for people who needed it. He'd have to be worth that. He went back inside, and the garden was quiet behind him, and somewhere on the edge of the wards, the cold presence waited and watched and for the first time since last night, moved a fraction farther away. Not retreating. Just thinking. Good. He was thinking too. Chapter 3, Old Blood, New Flame. The attack came on a Wednesday, which felt insulting somehow. Not a Friday, not the dramatic punctuation of a weekend. A Wednesday, halfway through a school week, during what was supposed to be a free period, while Izuku was on the roof of the East Building with a cup of vending machine coffee that was aggressively mediocre and a view of Kuo that had become, in 3 days, something that felt almost like his. He felt them before he heard anything. 6 signatures, approaching from 3 directions simultaneously, which told him immediately that this wasn't opportunistic. The coordination required either very good communication or a predetermined plan, and the quality of the energy signatures, contained, disciplined, each one sitting inside a carefully maintained suppression field, told him these weren't strays or minor actors. Sacred gear users. Multiple. He set down the coffee. It wasn't very good anyway. The roof door opened. 3 of them came through it, 2 young men and a woman, maybe early 20s, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who drilled this. They were wearing civilian clothes and neutral expressions, and they all had the same quality he'd learned to identify as someone who has been convinced they're doing something necessary. Not cruel. Not sadistic. Just, committed to a framing. Izuku Midoriya, the woman said. She was the lead. Short hair, steady hands, a sacred gear manifesting across her left arm like a gauntlet of pale light. We're here on behalf of a concerned party. This doesn't need to be violent. Then don't make it violent, he said reasonably. Come with us for a simple evaluation and, no. He put his hands in his pockets. I said that to the last group too. I'll keep saying it. He looked at her directly. Who are you working for? You're not Vritra's faction, his people use fallen angel proxies and you 3 are human. She hesitated. Just briefly. That's not relevant to, it really is, he said, because if you're contractors rather than true believers, you should think carefully about whether whoever hired you was honest about what they sent you to retrieve. The other 2 had moved to flank him, which was professionally done and would have worked on most people. The roof had limited exit options, the door, a maintenance ladder on the north side, and the edge. He'd noted all of it the first time he'd come up here, 2 days ago, because old habits died with significant resistance. Sacred gear suppression array, 3-point formation, the woman said, and the gauntlet on her arm flared. Her 2 companions activated simultaneously, one with something that looked like bands of golden light wrapping his forearms, one with a mirror-like surface manifesting at his chest that began pulling ambient energy toward it like a drain. The air changed. He felt the suppression field click into place around him, a deliberate dampening, designed to cap power output below threshold. It was sophisticated work. Against most targets it would have been highly effective. It didn't do anything to him. Not because he fought it. He didn't fight it. He just wasn't affected by it, in the way that a stone isn't affected by a net designed to catch fish. The Beast King authority wasn't a power output in the conventional sense. It wasn't energy he produced or a force he directed. It was what he was, and you couldn't suppress someone's fundamental nature any more than you could put a suppression field around the concept of gravity. He stood in the center of their array, completely unaffected, and watched them realize it. The man with the golden bands looked at his equipment with the expression of someone whose instrument is telling them something impossible. The array is active. Full suppression. Why isn't he? Your suppression field works, Izuku said, not unkindly. It's just suppressing the wrong category of thing. He looked at them. I'll ask again. Who sent you? Something shifted in the dynamic. The woman, he could see her recalibrating, running the discrepancy between what was supposed to happen and what was happening, trying to find the error. That was when the other three came up the maintenance ladder. He'd tracked them on the way up, less disciplined than the first group, moving faster, which meant they were the force component while the first three were the containment. The one leading them came over the edge of the roof with a sacred gear already deployed, a massive constructive compressed force shaped roughly like a tower shield, and he was fast, genuinely fast, launching himself forward with the shield angled to pin rather than strike. Izuku sidestepped it. Completely. Not powerfully, not dramatically, just wasn't there when it arrived, and let the momentum carry the user 2 steps past him. He put a hand on the back of the user's collar as he went by, not hard, just enough contact to redirect and deposit him sideways onto the roof surface, face down, unhurt. He straightened up. The remaining 5 stared at him. He's not using his power, the woman said slowly. She was smart, he could see her arriving at the right conclusion in real time. That wasn't a power. That was just movement. My old world had people who could bench press buildings, Izuku said. If you trained against that long enough, you get decent at not being where the hit goes. He looked at the man he'd just deposited on the roof surface, who was pushing himself upright with the expression of someone processing genuine surprise without ego. You okay? Yeah, the man said. Good. Izuku looked at all of them. I'm going to ask one more time, and then I'm going to walk down those stairs, and whatever happens after that happens without my input. Who sent you? The woman looked at her companions. Some silent communication moved through the group, not spoken, just the shared calculation of people who are revising their mission parameters on the fly. Mephisto Corridor faction, she said finally. We're independent contractors. We were told you were a rogue supernatural entity with no formal standing, potentially dangerous, needing assessment before you destabilized the Kuo balance. A beat. We were not told that a standard sacred gear suppression array would be irrelevant. Because whoever hired you knew you'd ask more questions if they'd been honest about what I am, Izuku said. Not angry, he didn't have the energy to be angry at people who'd been given bad information. Mephisto Corridor. Are they aligned with Vritra's faction? Adjacent, she said carefully. They work in parallel. They're not the same organization. So Vritra wasn't working alone. He was part of a wider network of interests that had reasons of their own to want the Beast King either controlled or eliminated. That was more complex than he'd initially mapped. He filed it and turned toward the door. For what it's worth, he said over his shoulder, you were good. The 3-point array was well positioned. If I'd been anything conventional, it would have worked. He paused with his hand on the door. Consider not taking jobs from Mephisto Corridor again. They tend to send contractors into situations without complete information, which means they're comfortable with your risk profile being higher than advertised. He went inside. He told Rias immediately, which he'd promised to do and intended to keep promising. She listened to all of it without interrupting, which was a quality he was coming to appreciate about her, the ability to receive information completely before responding to it. When he finished she was quiet for a moment, standing in the club room with her arms crossed loosely and her eyes focused on something internal. Mephisto Corridor, she said. You know them. I know of them. They're a contract faction, they don't hold territory, they don't have pillar standing, they operate as intermediaries and enforcers for hire. She frowned slightly. Vritra using them means he wants deniability. If they'd successfully taken you, he could claim no direct involvement. Smart, Izuku said. He's building a structure where every move he makes has separation between him and the action. Which means direct legal challenge is difficult. She looked at him. You sent them away. They weren't my enemy. They were just, he searched for the word, misdirected. Kiba, from the corner, said quietly, there were 6 of them. Sacred gear users. You sent them away without activating anything. I activated something, Izuku said. I mean without using your Beast King abilities. The suppression field activated. It just didn't do anything. He sat down. I think the Beast King thing isn't a power I turn on. It's more like, an atmosphere. It's always running. What changes is the intensity. Rias had been watching him throughout this exchange with an expression he was becoming familiar with, the look of someone encountering a problem that's significantly more interesting than problems usually are. She had a mind that liked complexity, he could see it in the way she asked questions, the way she built toward conclusions through a series of deliberate observations rather than jumping. She would have been extraordinary in any field that rewarded that kind of thinking. She'd chosen, or been chosen for, one of the most politically complex environments he'd ever encountered, and she was good at it. We need to understand what you can actually do, she said. Not as intelligence gathering for my benefit. For yours. If Vritra is escalating, the next attempt won't be 6 contractors with sacred gears. I know. What would you need? She asked. He thought about it. Space. Something to test against. And someone who won't go easy on me because they're worried about hurting me. Xenovia, who'd been silent in the corner sharpening something that was definitely a weapon today, looked up. I'll do it, she said. I thought you might, he said. The training space was underground, a vast chamber beneath the estate that existed in the same expanded space logic as the rest of the building, ceiling high enough to accommodate significant violence and floors reinforced with something that held up under devil-level impacts without complaint. Izuku had been told it predated the current building by several centuries, which explained why the stone work had the particular quality of things built by people who expected them to last. Xenovia stood across from him in the center of the chamber, and she was different down here than she was anywhere else. The measured, slightly contained quality she carried at school and at the dinner table was gone. She was fully present in a way that was almost startling, like a photograph that suddenly became three-dimensional. She held Durandal loosely at her side, the holy sword's energy a steady, brilliant white that lit the chamber warmly. Rules, she said. Don't die, he said. That's my only one. She looked at him for a moment. Then she moved. She was extraordinarily fast. He'd clocked her in the garden, but that had been a probe, this was full commitment, Durandal swinging in an arc that carried enough divine energy to level a building, and she came in low and drove up through the motion so the impact point was rising when it arrived, which was the hardest angle to read. He moved left, felt the edge of the blast from the swing scorching the air beside him, and kept moving, putting distance between them while he read her second angle. She was already adjusting. Good. She didn't overcommit, didn't lean into the miss, she used it as a pivot, transitioning to a different approach without the hitch that most fighters have between an attack and its follow-through. He felt the Beast King thing in him responding to the engagement. Not defensively. More like waking up, the way an animal raises its head when something interesting happens. The ambient quality of his presence deepened and spread, filling the chamber. Xenovia felt it. He saw it in her, she blinked, just once, the specific blink of someone recalibrating their threat assessment, and then she went harder, which impressed him considerably. She came at him 3 more times in quick succession, vertical strike, horizontal sweep, a thrust that was a feint transitioning to a heel pivot and a swing from the opposite direction. He read the first, ducked the second, and the third actually caught him, the flat of the blade, not the edge, connecting with his right shoulder and sending him sideways 3 steps. He rolled with it. Came up. Felt where the impact had been, sharp, real, his shoulder complaining but functional. Good, he said. You took that, she said, breathing slightly harder than before. You didn't dodge it. I wanted to feel the impact. I needed data. She frowned. You're using the fight as an experiment. Aren't you? A beat. Then the closest thing to a smile he'd seen from her, just a shift at the corner of her mouth. Fair. Come again, he said. Full force. She did. And this time he didn't move entirely. What he did was, hold. He let the authority in him consolidate, not directed outward, just present, and he stepped into Durandal's swing instead of away from it and brought his forearm up to meet the blade. The impact rang through the chamber like a struck bell. The shockwave cracked the stone floor in a 3-meter radius. Dust fell from the ceiling. Xenovia was thrown back 2 steps by her own swing's recoil, a thing he could see genuinely surprised her because it had never happened before. He stood in the center of the crack pattern, his forearm where he'd blocked, and he was fine. The Beast King resonance had met Durandal's holy power and hadn't defeated it, exactly. More like contextualized it. The sword's authority was profound. His was simply older, in a categorical sense that had nothing to do with age. The holy energy dissipated against him the way water dissipates against stone. The chamber was very quiet. Xenovia stared at his arm. You blocked Durandal with your arm. I blocked it with whatever I am, he said. I'm still figuring out the parameters. Does it hurt? He checked honestly. A little. Like catching something heavy, more impact than damage. He lowered his arm. The holy energy doesn't affect me the way it would a devil. It doesn't affect you like it would anything, she said. She was doing the thing he'd noticed before, filing information without wrapping it in emotion first, processing cleanly. Then she looked up from his arm to his face. What does it feel like? When you do that? The question was unexpectedly personal. He thought about how to answer it honestly. Like standing in a river, he said finally. The water's moving. Force is real. But you're part of the river bed. The movement doesn't take you anywhere you don't decide to go. She was quiet for a moment. I've been fighting my whole life, she said, and the matter-of-fact quality of it couldn't quite cover the weight underneath. Before the church, during it, after. Every fight I've ever been in, the strength I had was something I had to maintain. Push for, train for. It cost something. She looked at him. You didn't choose this. No, he said. Does that bother you? He thought about One for All. About carrying the inherited power of 8 previous users because a man with a sunken face had breathed his quirk into him on a rooftop and changed the entire trajectory of his life. About how long it had taken him to feel like that power was actually his. It used to, he said. Power I didn't earn. I've been through this version of the question before. He met her eyes. But I've had time to learn that what you do with it matters more than where it came from. She looked at him for a long time. Then she came at him again, and this time there was something different in the engagement, the quality of a fight that had become something else, not sparring, not testing, but 2 people who have said something real to each other and found that the physical language is easier than continuing verbally. He fought back this time. Not with the Beast King resonance, not with anything that wasn't just him, footwork, timing, the deeply ingrained reflex memory of someone who'd spent a decade learning how to fight beyond the limits of a human body. He was slower than her, and he was underpowered without activating anything additional, and she hit him twice more, real hits, a blow to the ribs and a flat strike across his left side that was going to bruise spectacularly. But he was also never quite where she aimed. He made her work for every contact, adjusted after each impact, gave her nothing free. And at the end of 40 minutes, when they both stopped by unspoken agreement, Xenovia was breathing hard and the training floor between them was thoroughly destroyed. You're holding back, she said. Yes. Why? Because I don't know my ceiling yet. And testing a ceiling without knowing where it is in an enclosed space with other people nearby is irresponsible. She looked at the cracked floor. Then at the ceiling, which had developed some new fissures. Then at him. Next time, she said, we find somewhere with more room. Deal, he said. She picked up Durandal from where she'd set it during the last exchange, dismissed it, and rolled her shoulder. Then, with the directness that was becoming one of the things he genuinely liked about her, you're going to need to stop being careful at some point. When Vritra moves seriously, careful won't be enough. I know. So figure it out, she said. Not harshly. The way you say something to someone you've decided to be honest with. Don't let the uncertainty become a habit. She went upstairs. He stood in the ruined training chamber for a while after, hands at his sides, looking at the crack patterns in the floor and thinking about what it meant to know your own ceiling. He found out 3 hours later, though not in any way he'd planned. He was in the main room reviewing the historical texts Rias had made available. There was a significant body of material on Beast King precedent, most of it third-hand interpretation and political annotation, but useful in aggregate, when Aquino appeared in the doorway with her smile operating at reduced capacity, which he'd learned was her version of telling him something was wrong before she said it. We have a problem, she said. Vritra? Proxies. She came in, sat down across from him, and folded her hands in her lap, not the practiced elegance she usually performed, just someone sitting carefully. 3 of my detection wards at the edge of the Eastern District went dark 20 minutes ago. Not damaged, actively dismantled. Whatever did it knew exactly where they were and exactly how to neutralize them. Inside information. That's what it suggests. Her eyes moved to his. Underneath the calm and the composure and all the layers she built around herself, something genuinely troubled was looking at him. It takes time to acquire that kind of information. They've been planning this specific approach for longer than we've known about you. Which means, Izuku said slowly, that someone was already planning to move against this territory before I arrived. My arrival just accelerated the timeline. She nodded. Rias is in contact with her brother's people trying to trace the information leak. Kiba and Xenovia are doing perimeter checks. Asia is, she paused, staying inside. And you're telling me? Because you should know, she said simply. Then, after a moment, with less of the practice delivery, and because you're the only one in the building right now who doesn't look afraid. He looked at her. The performance was down enough that he could see what was underneath it more clearly, not weakness, not fragility, but someone who had learned to make herself into a very effective wall and was standing behind it even now, even when the thing outside the wall was genuinely frightening. You're afraid, he said. Not accusatory. Just true. I have reasons, she said. I know. He didn't ask her what they were. He filed it as something she'd tell him when she was ready, or wouldn't, and both were her prerogative. She looked at him with an expression that was doing several things at once. There was the assessment she always ran, the charm mechanism on standby, and underneath both, something more direct. More real. You really are very hard to unsettle, she said. I've been unsettled plenty, he said. I just don't find it useful to show it in the middle of a situation. That's not the same as not being afraid. No, he agreed. They sat with that for a moment. 3 wards dismantled, he said, refocusing. Eastern District. That's the direction of the ruins. Aquino straightened slightly. You think they're moving through the ruins? If someone wants to establish a staging point for a significant operation in Kuo, the ruins are the most powerful natural anchor point in the area. 3,000 years of Beast King resonance in the stone. You could amplify almost any operation by grounding it there. He was already standing. I need to go there. Izuku, I'm not going to fight anything I don't have to. But if they establish a command anchor at the ruins before I do, any operation they run from it will be significantly more powerful. He looked at her. Can you hold the estate's defenses? She stood too, and the performance was fully down now, no smile, no charm architecture, just Akino Himejima, who was formidable in her own right, straightening to her full height with lightning sparking quietly at her fingertips. "I can hold anything short of a pillar-level assault," she said. "What's your plan at the ruins?" "Claim them," he said simply. Her eyes widened slightly. "You mean, I am the Beast King," he said. "Those ruins are mine. They've always been mine. I just haven't said it yet." He went out through the garden door, and the night wrapped around him, and behind him he heard Akino pulling the wards tight and the faint percussion of lightning in her hands as she prepared. The eastern forest was different at night. The arterial red leaves had closed against the dark, and the trees themselves seemed more present, not threatening, but aware, with the quality of things that have been waiting for something specific for a very long time and have recently concluded the wait is nearly over. He moved through them fast. His awareness spread outward automatically, reading the space, 8 signatures in and around the ruins, some human, some not, all with the tight professional quality of a trained operation in progress. They'd already reached the ruins. Were already beginning to establish an anchor point, which meant they'd prepared for this over days, not hours. He broke the tree line at a run and arrived at the edge of the ruined circle to find a scene of organized activity, a central figure, an older man, pillar-adjacent energy, the kind of power that came from decades of accumulated refinement, standing at the carved central stone with his hands pressed flat against it, feeding something into the inscription. Around him, 7 others in a perimeter, facing outward. They all felt him arrive. The perimeter people turned. The central figure kept his hands on the stone. "Midoriya," the central figure said, without turning. His voice was deep and carefully controlled, the voice of someone who has given a great many orders over a great many years. "You're faster than anticipated. Vritra said 2 days before you'd locate us." "Tell him to recalibrate," Izuku said. "He'll appreciate the feedback." Now the man turned, lifting his hands from the stone. He was perhaps 60 in appearance, hawk-nosed, wearing clothes that were high quality and completely unremarkable, the deliberate camouflage of someone who's learned that the most dangerous-looking person in a room rarely needs to look dangerous. "I'm Caius. I represent Lord Vritra's primary interests in this region." He looked at Izuku with genuine curiosity. "I expected someone more, formidable-looking. I get that a lot." "What I have been told," Caius said, his tone the same as if they were discussing a business negotiation, "is that you are politically inexperienced, newly arrived, and fundamentally alone. That your apparent authority over lesser supernatural entities is impressive but untested against serious opposition." He tilted his head. "Lord Vritra believes you can be managed." "I'm inclined to agree." Izuku looked at the stone. The inscription was still visible beneath whatever Caius had been feeding into it, the crown with its downward curved teeth, the text still legible. "Vacant. Waiting." "That inscription is wrong," he said. "Excuse me." "The crown is vacant." He looked at Caius. "I'm correcting that. Right now." He put his hand on the stone. The reaction was immediate and total. It went through the earth first, a pulse, deep and structural, like a sound below hearing, moving outward from the ruins in an expanding ring. The carved inscription lit from underneath, not with any color he could name, something that was light in the way the origin of light is light, before it differentiates into spectrum. The trees at the forest edge shuddered. The arterial leaves opened all at once, all of them, every tree in the visible forest, turning toward the ruins the way flowers turn toward the sun. From somewhere deeper in the forest, something very large made a low, resonant sound. Then another. Then 3 more, in different directions, all converging in quality if not in location, acknowledgement. Recognition. Caius had stepped back. His composure was intact but its foundation had shifted. The 7 perimeter people were in various states of the specific alarm that comes when you prepared for one type of problem and discovered another type entirely. The Beast King resonance in the stone didn't just respond to Izuku's touch. It recognized it. 3,000 years of waiting collapsing into a single present moment, the ruins remembering what they were for. He felt it come up through the stone and into his hand and up his arm, and he understood, fully and completely for the first time since he'd woken up here, what he was. Not a title inherited from a dead king. Not a role assigned by destiny or divine convenience. The ruins had been vacant because the position itself had been waiting for someone specific, not someone powerful enough to hold it by force, but someone coherent enough to hold it by being entirely themselves under any pressure. The previous king had held it for 300 years, and then it had been vacant for 3,000 because the bar was specific and unusual. He looked at Caius, and his hand stayed flat on the stone, and the light from the inscription was quiet now, not extinguished, just settled, the way a fire settles after the initial lighting into something that's meant to last. "Tell Vritra," he said, and his voice had that quality again, not loud, not performed, just the full depth of what he was in every syllable, that the throne isn't vacant anymore. And that the unaligned accord covers me as a recognized sovereign entity now, not just as a free agent. The legal distinction is significant. A beat. He'll understand. Caius looked at him for a long moment. Calculating. Not retreating into panic, which confirmed that he was exactly as capable and dangerous as he appeared. He was genuinely weighing options in real time, running scenarios, revising. "This changes the shape of things," Caius said finally. "Yes," Izuku said. "It does. Vritra will not simply accept, I know. I'm not asking him to accept it. I'm informing him of the fact." He met Caius's eyes steadily. "The difference between those two things matters. One requires his agreement. The other doesn't." Another pause. Then Caius made a small gesture, contained, deliberate, and his 7 people stood down. "We'll be in contact," Caius said. "I'll be here," Izuku said. They left. All 8 of them, with the controlled unhurried movement of a professional withdrawal rather than a retreat, which was probably important to them and was fine with him. He stood at the stone alone, hands still against it, and felt the forest settle around him. Somewhere deep in the dark between the trees, the large something that had made the resonant sound was still present, waiting, patient, far larger than anything that should live in a forest this close to a residential area. "You can come out," Izuku said quietly, to the dark. Nothing happened for a moment. Then the tree line 40 meters ahead parted, slowly, and a form emerged from the shadows that was enormous and faintly luminous, a great stag, 7 meters at the shoulder, its antlers carrying the specific curve of things grown over centuries rather than years, its coat the deep color of midnight with something like starlight running through the pattern of its markings. It walked to the edge of the ruins and stopped. It looked at him with eyes the color of deep water. Then it lowered its head. Not all the way to the ground, not submission. More like a bow between equals who recognize each other. "Hello," Izuku said. He felt the weight of the moment fully, the ruins lit from within, the ancient stag acknowledging him, the forest awake around him, 3,000 years of history closing into the present tense. He was the Beast King. He was 20-odd years old, dead in one world, alive in another, recently in possession of a student ID and a stipend and no particularly clear plan beyond "don't let the bad people win." But he was also this. He could work with both. He got back to the estate at midnight to find Rias on the garden steps, still dressed, clearly having chosen to wait rather than receive a report through Aquino. She took one look at him and something in her expression changed in the specific way of someone who'd been hoping for a particular outcome and received it but hadn't quite let themselves believe they would. "You claimed it," she said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, and the night garden was around them with its careful warding and its old stone, and she looked at him with that deep water regard and said something he didn't expect. "How do you feel?" He thought about it honestly. "Clearer," he said. "Like I've been walking in a room I didn't have the lights on in, and now I do." She was quiet. "Then, Vritra will know by morning." "I know. Things are going to move faster now." "I know." He looked at her. She was sitting on the steps with her arms around her knees, her crimson hair down, the political composure she usually wore having given way to something more direct in the late-night quiet. She looked like herself. He realized that was the first time he'd felt he was seeing her fully rather than through the layer she usually maintained. "You should sleep," he said. "Whatever's coming, you'll need to be sharp." "So should you." "I will." He paused at the garden door. "Rias." She looked up. "Thank you," he said. "For the book. The space. The documentation. Asia's eggs. All of it." He met her eyes. "I know it wasn't nothing. I won't forget it." She held his gaze for a moment. Something real and unguarded moved through her expression, and she didn't hide it, and he didn't pretend not to see it. "Go sleep," she said softly. He went inside. Behind him, he heard her stay on the steps for a while, in the quiet dark, with the warded garden around her and the night air and whatever she was thinking, privately, in the space she'd made for herself. Inside, the house was warm. Asia had left a lamp on in the hall. Kaneko was asleep on the main room couch with a chip bag on her chest like a small, combative treasure. Akino's door was closed, and through it he could hear nothing, which meant she was either asleep or very still, and he chose to believe the former. He went to his room. He lay down. He closed his eyes. The throne wasn't vacant anymore. Whatever came next, it came next. Chapter 4, The Weight of Crowns. The challenge arrived by formal letter, which said everything about the kind of person who sent it. It came on a Saturday morning, hand-delivered by a devil in a suit who knocked on the estate's front gate with the crisp efficiency of someone who absolutely knew what the letter contained and had made peace with being the one to deliver it. Rias read it at the breakfast table while everyone else ate, and her expression went through several changes that were subtle enough that most people would have missed them. Izuku didn't miss them. She set the letter down when she finished. Picked up her tea. Drank. "Serorg Bale's cousin," she said. "Rexus Bale. Junior branch, second-tier standing, but backed by Vritra's faction financially for the last 2 years." She looked around the table. "He's issued a formal rating game challenge. 3 weeks from today." "He can't do that," Kiba said. His voice was careful in the way of someone who knows an argument they're about to make is technically correct and practically useless. "You're not obligated to accept unsolicited challenges from, I can decline," Rias said. "And then 6 months from now, Rexus files a territory dispute through the Pillar Council, and it becomes a formal proceeding instead of a game, which means Vritra's legal people get involved, which means this becomes a public political event instead of a contained one." She turned the letter over once and set it back down. "Accepting is strategically cleaner." "It's also a trap," Xenovia said. "Yes," Rias agreed, without apparent distress. "It's a well-designed one." Izuku had been quiet through this. He was looking at the letter from where he sat, reading it upside down, which was a skill he'd developed in years of mission briefings where the relevant documents were always on the other side of a table. Rexus Bale's team composition was listed at the bottom of the second page, as per rating game formality requirements, 8 pieces, experienced, the lineup reading like a carefully assembled counterbuild to Rias's peerage specifically. Someone had done their homework. Extensively. "They know your team," he said. Rias looked at him. "Yes. The lineup is a direct counter. Rexus's bishop pair are both sacred gear wielders with area suppression. That's specifically calibrated against Akino." He looked at Kiba. "His knight piece is a speed type who fought in the mid-tier games circuit for 3 years. The data on your fight patterns is probably comprehensive." He looked at Xenovia last. "And he's brought a rook piece that's a holy element specialist. Specifically to neutralize my power," Xenovia said flatly. "Yes." The table was quiet for a moment. Outside, the morning was gray and mild, the garden wet from overnight rain, everything very ordinary and calm in the specific way that preceded something not being ordinary or calm. "You're unregistered," Kiba said, looking at Izuku. As far as the game's officiating board is concerned, you don't exist in any peerage. I know. Meaning you can't participate in the rating game. I know that too. So what are you thinking? Rias asked. She was watching him the way she sometimes did, not waiting for a solution, exactly, more like watching him think, which she told him once she found useful as a way of understanding how he approached problems. I'm thinking, he said, that rating games have spectators. Officially accredited observers who are present for transparency and verification. And that there's no rule against an unregistered independent entity being in the venue as an observer. Observers can't intervene in a game, Kiba said. No, Izuku agreed. They can't. That would be a serious rules violation with significant political consequences. He picked up his tea. Good thing I'm talking about observing. He said it with a completely straight face. Rias looked at him for 3 long seconds. Then she looked away, and the corner of her mouth did the thing it did when she was trying not to smile and was applying significant effort to the project. You can't intervene, she said, with the specific tone of someone stating a rule clearly so that everyone understands it has been stated. Of course not, he said. Across the table, Kaneko ate her rice and said, he's absolutely going to intervene. Kaneko, Rias said. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. 3 weeks was not a lot of time. It was, however, enough time for several things to happen, and Izuku made use of all of it. The first thing he did was get the full recorded history of Rexus Bale's previous rating games, 12 of them, over 4 years, a progression from messy early matches to something considerably more refined and considerably more ruthless. Rexus fought to dominate rather than to win, which meant he created situations where the opposition could technically surrender but making it maximally costly to do so. He was the kind of fighter who wanted to send messages. The second thing was understand the rating game format itself, which turned out to be more strategically interesting than he'd initially assumed, not a simple battle but a territorial control game played across a constructed environment, with pieces being retired when they sustained defined levels of damage, and the king piece constituting a match point. Real tactics, real stakes, real consequence for every decision. The third thing was work with Rias's peerage. This happened organically rather than by design. He started by simply being present during their preparation sessions, watching, noting, occasionally asking questions that were either tactically useful or revealed something about the person he was watching that he filed away. After the first week, Rias started directing questions back to him during strategy discussions. After the second week he was effectively running the analysis portion of every session, which no one had formally agreed to but which had simply become the natural arrangement. You do this thing, Aquino said one evening, finding him in the library deep in rating game records. Where you just occupy a role without asking permission for it. You see that it needs doing and you do it. Is that a problem? He asked, without looking up. No, she said. She sat across from him with that quality she'd been carrying more often lately, the performance running at lower intensity, something more actual underneath it. It's interesting. Most people, when they find themselves in a room with Rias Gremory, spend considerable energy establishing whether they're wanted or needed. You don't. I know I'm useful, he said. Whether I'm wanted is her question, not mine. Aquino was quiet for a moment. That's either very confident or very self-contained, she said. Somewhere between, he admitted. He looked up. She was watching him with an expression that was doing less work than usual, not fully disarmed, but the mechanism was idle. You do the same thing in reverse, he said. You perform warmth so consistently that when real warmth comes out, no one around you knows what to do with it. She blinked. The expression shifted. That's a fairly direct observation, she said. You seem like someone who's tired of indirection but hasn't quite given yourself permission to stop using it, he said. Not unkindly. Just honestly. You don't have to perform anything for me. It's a waste of your energy. The silence that followed was a specific kind, the silence of someone sitting with something that landed more accurately than they expected and were deciding what to do with it. "You're going to be a problem," she said finally. But there was no edge in it. Just truth, said plainly, by someone who dropped a layer they hadn't planned to drop. "Probably," he said, and went back to his records. The day before the game, Rias came to find him in the garden at dusk. He was sitting on the low stone wall at the far end, watching the light change over the tree line, doing the meditation-adjacent thing he'd developed in his old world for processing high-pressure situations, not emptying his mind, because that had never worked for him, more like letting everything present itself without immediately demanding to be resolved. She sat beside him on the wall, close enough that her shoulder was near his, with the ease of someone who'd stopped performing distance. "Tell me what you're worried about," she said. He looked at her. "Who says I'm worried? You've been very calm all week," she said. "You're always somewhat calm, but this is specific. Deliberate." She held his gaze. "What are you worried about?" He thought about deflecting. Then didn't. "Aquino," he said. "The area suppression sacred gears in Rexus's bishop pair. Her power comes from releasing energy in large patterns. The suppression will cap her output before it reaches useful scale. She can still fight, but she'll be fighting restricted." He paused. "She won't say it, but it frightens her. Restricted power is a specific kind of helplessness, and she's had enough of that in her life." Rias was very still. "Asia," he continued. "She's a healer, which means in a raiding game format she becomes the most valuable target on the field. Rexus will send someone specifically for her. She knows it and she's trying not to show it, and she's showing it anyway. And the others? Kiba will be fine. He's the best at adapting mid-fight, he doesn't telegraph, and he's underestimated by anyone who hasn't seen him at full capacity. Xenovia," he paused, "Xenovia worries me the least and also the most. She'll fight without limit even against a holy element specialist. She won't hold back to protect herself, and that's both her greatest strength and her worst habit," Rias said softly. "Yes. And Kaneko?" "Kaneko will be fine," he said. "Kaneko is always fine in the ways that matter. She's honest about what she can do and she doesn't exceed it unnecessarily." Rias was quiet for a moment. The light was deep orange now, catching in her hair, and she looked out at the tree line with the expression she wore when she was fully present in a thought rather than managing the room around her. "You know my people very well," she said. "For 3 weeks. I pay attention." "You pay a specific kind of attention," she said. "You learn people from the inside. From what they carry, not from what they show." She turned to look at him, and the light made her eyes very clear. "What do you think about when you study someone that way? What are you looking for?" "I'm looking for what they need," he said, simply. She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that the light shifted again, the orange deepening toward red. "What do I need?" she asked. The question was direct in a way that cost her something. He could see that, the specific composure of someone who asked something vulnerable and was holding their face carefully because they weren't sure what the answer would do to them. "Someone who isn't afraid of you," he said. "Not what you represent, not what you can do, you. Someone who just," he looked for the word, "sees you and isn't moved to do anything about it except be present." He held her gaze. "You're surrounded by people who need you or owe you or are managed by you. That's a lonely configuration." The silence stretched out over the garden. "You're quite good at this," she said finally. Her voice had a quality he hadn't heard from her before, something unguarded, stripped of the competence and the authority, just a person on a wall at dusk. "At seeing people. Old world, old life," he said. "I spent a long time learning to look past what people showed me to find what they needed, because usually what they needed was the actual problem and what they showed me was just the expression of it." "The hero," she said softly. "Yeah." He let the word sit. "The hero." She turned back toward the tree line. After a moment she said, "Tomorrow is going to be difficult. Yes. Whatever you're planning to do, that technically isn't intervention. I'll be careful, he said. That's not what I was going to say. She looked at him again. I was going to say, don't be so careful that you're too late. He met her eyes. Something passed between them, not romantic, not precisely, something more foundational than that. The specific agreement of two people who have decided to trust each other without the safety net of formal commitments. I won't be too late, he said. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she stood, smoothed her skirt with the composed gesture that was habitual rather than performed, and said, "Get some sleep." She went inside. He stayed on the wall until the last light was gone and the garden was all shadow and star-scattered sky, and then he went in too. The raiding game venue was a constructed space, a territory summoned into a sealed dimension for the duration of the match, looking like a medium-sized European city frozen at twilight, streets empty, buildings as solid and real as any material structure. Izuku arrived through the observer's access channel 30 minutes before the start, which put him in the elevated gallery above the central square, a glass and steel observation box designed to allow official witnesses to monitor without influence. The gallery had 4 official observers already present, 2 functionaries from the Pillar Council rating board in formal devil attire, 1 independent recorder maintaining the official transcript, and a 4th figure that Izuku noted immediately, older, impeccably dressed, watching the preparation with the specific quality of someone who was here for reasons that had nothing to do with impartial record-keeping. Caius. He was sitting 2 rows from the front, apparently absorbed in his tablet. He looked up when Izuku entered. "Midoriya," he said. "Here as an observer." "Same as you," Izuku said pleasantly, and sat down in the row behind him. Caius said nothing. But his shoulders had a quality that said he'd noted the positioning. Below, the venue populated, Rias's team entering from the south quarter, Rexus's from the north, the game's officiating system beginning its pre-match protocols. Izuku watched the field. Rias moved through the initial positioning with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd played this game many times, directing her pieces with small gestures and eye contact, the specific shorthand of people who know each other well. He watched Akino take her position and he watched the exact moment she felt the area suppression field activate as Rexus's bishop pair powered up. He saw it in the set of her shoulders, a single contained adjustment, like a door closing over something she didn't want visible. Then she smiled her professional smile and he knew she was running on will alone in that department. He watched Rexus himself. The man was mid-30s, broad-shouldered, wearing his wealth in the particular way of people who've always had it, not displayed but assumed, worked into every posture. He looked at Rias across the field with the expression of someone who's confident in the outcome and wants her to know it. It was the expression that told Izuku most. Rexus wasn't playing to win a game. He was playing to humiliate a person. That was the message, not territorial, not political at its core, but personal. Someone had pointed this man at Rias Gremory and told him this was his opportunity to diminish her publicly, and he believed it and committed to it. That made him predictable in the ways that mattered. The first 20 minutes went as expected. Rexus's team played the counter-build aggressively, the area suppression fields radiating from his bishop pair, limiting Akino's range and forcing her into close-quarters engagement she hadn't prepared for. She adapted, which was a credit to her, but adapted under penalty. Every adjustment cost energy she couldn't replace. Kiba was handling the speed knight in a running engagement that was too even for Izuku's comfort, 2 matched fighters finding that matched fights favor whoever has more resource. Xenovia, as predicted, was fighting without conservation. She'd met the holy element rook head-on, Durandal blazing, and was winning. She was simply better, but the holy element specialist was taking the hits and returning them with an efficiency that said he'd fought Xenovia's type before and understood that outlasting her was more achievable than overpowering her. Asia was, so far, untouched. Which meant the targeting was coming. Izuku watched from the gallery with his hands folded and his awareness spread through the constructed space the way it spread through the natural world, reading signatures, tracking positions, mapping the shape of what was happening versus what was planned. "Your concern is evident," Caius said, without turning around. I'm observing, Izuku said. You are, Caius agreed. Very intently. A pause. Lord Vritra would like to communicate something through me. A formal statement. I'm listening. He acknowledges your claim on the ruins. He acknowledges the unaligned accord protection and the sovereign entity reclassification. A beat. He also wishes you to know that today's game has nothing to do with you directly. Rexus Bale is acting on family ambition and Vritra's faction's financial interest in territorial expansion. It's business. And you're telling me this why? Because Lord Vritra doesn't want you to misinterpret his operations, Caius said. He's a careful man. He prefers clarity in his adversarial relationships. He's trying to prevent me from becoming involved, Izuku said. Caius was quiet. Tell him I appreciate the communication. Izuku kept his eyes on the field. Tell him I'm here as an observer. He'll find that reassuring, Caius said, with the dry precision of someone who found it nothing of the kind. Below, the targeting began. Rexus sent 2 of his pawns for Asia, not his strongest pieces, but his fastest, running a flanking pattern from opposite streets that was designed to converge from angles Kiba couldn't cover without abandoning his own engagement. Asia saw them coming, which Izuku had made sure of by spending an hour the previous night going through this exact scenario with her, not combat training, just threat recognition. This is what a targeting run looks like. This is where you move. She moved. She was slower than the pawns, but she had a 30-second head start because she'd read it correctly, and she moved toward Kaneko rather than away from the threat, which collapsed the angle. Kaneko met the first pawn with the flat certainty of someone who has decided this is not a fight but an interruption of her afternoon, and was done with it in 7 seconds. The second pawn pulled back. Reassessing. Izuku released a breath he'd been holding. Kiba was struggling. The Speed Knight had found a rhythm and was using it, controlled exchanges, precise timing, wearing the edge off Kiba's reflexes one small cut at a time. It was patient, skilled work, and it was working. Izuku put his hand on the railing of the gallery and leaned forward slightly. He didn't do anything. He wasn't going to do anything. He watched the field and let the Beast King awareness spread outward and simply, was present. Fully present, without filtering or containing it. Below, something changed. Not in any piece specifically. In the quality of the constructed space itself, the ambient supernatural resonance of the venue, which was after all a contained dimension built from devil energy, a living thing of sorts, and living things responded to certain kinds of presence the way water responds to heat. The venue recognized what was in the gallery. The constructed environment, built from devil energy in dimensional architecture, registered his presence the way the ruins had registered his touch, not with deference, not with submission, but with awareness. Every supernatural entity on the field felt it simultaneously. A ripple, not hostile, not an attack, just the quality of the air changing, pressure shifting, like a room when someone very significant enters it. Rexus looked up at the gallery. His face, for the first time, was uncertain. His bishop pair's concentration broke, only fractionally, only for a moment, but a fraction was enough. The area suppression fields flickered. Akino felt it like a door opening. She moved so fast it was almost not visible, the controlled, contained energy she'd been managing exploding outward in a single perfectly calibrated strike, lightning threading through the suppression gap before it closed, taking the closer bishop out of the game with the clean finality of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this and had the precision to use the half-second she was given. The game officiator announced the retirement. One of Rexus's pieces down. In the gallery, Caius turned around completely and looked at Izuku. That, he said carefully, was technically within observer parameters. It was, Izuku agreed. You didn't do anything actionable. I'm an observer, Izuku said. I was observing. You, Caius stopped. Made a decision. Turned back to the field. Lord Vritra, he said quietly, to his communication device, needs to hear this report immediately. The game shifted after that. Rexus felt the change in dynamic. Izuku could read it in how his tactical decisions became reactive rather than proactive, the specific quality of a player who'd been running a plan and has just learned the plan was built on incomplete information. He pushed harder, which was the wrong move, overcorrecting, committing resources to engagements before they were favorable. Xenovia ended the Holy Element Specialist with the directness of someone who'd been holding back a gear. Not Durandal, she put the sword away and fought with her hands and physical speed, which told Izuku she'd identified the specialist's weakness, close range where the Holy Element work became less effective. Brutal, clean, efficient. The kind of fighting that came from someone who understood that the most sophisticated technique was often just getting close enough fast enough. Kiba found his rhythm back in the gap created when Rexus pulled his speed knight to shore up a collapsing flank. He did what Kiba did, appeared where he wasn't expected and made the encounter extremely brief. Rias herself had been conserving through the match, which Izuku had specifically suggested, not because she needed to, but because Rexus's plan had been built around forcing her to spend energy defending her pieces, and pieces that didn't need defending meant she arrived at the endgame fresh. Rexus's king piece had that quality when she finally engaged him directly, the quality of a plan that had been carefully assembled and had not survived contact with the specific people it was assembled against. The game ended in 12 more minutes. The official space dissolved and they returned to the estate's primary reception room, the formal one, used for significant occasions, which had the proportions of a room that had seen important moments before and expected to see more. Rias's peerage was present, some of them carrying the quiet aftermath of hard fighting, Asia moving through with her healing already active on the more significant impacts. Rias herself was at the center of the room, and she was, composed, precise, correct in every visible detail, and underneath it there was a quality he recognized as the particular tiredness that comes not from the fight but from the effort of not letting the fight see you sweat. Izuku came in from the observation channel exit and she looked at him from across the room and said, "You didn't intervene." "I observed," he said. "The bishop's suppression broke because of you." "The bishop's concentration broke," he said. "I was present." "That's within observer parameters." She held his gaze. "Caius is going to file a complaint." "He can file it," Izuku said. "Everything I did is defensible under current protocols. It'll take 3 weeks minimum to get a hearing, and by then we'll have had 3 weeks of preparation time we didn't have before." She looked at him steadily. Then she said, quietly, "For him only, you bought us 3 weeks." "We needed 3 weeks," he said. Something complicated moved through her expression. Something that wanted to be grateful and was also, he could tell, slightly annoyed at how grateful it wanted to be, the specific annoyance of someone who decided to be independent and is confronted with the fact that being occasionally helped by the right person is not the same as dependence. "Thank you," she said finally, and it was real, undecorated. "The 3 weeks is for preparation," he said. "Because Caius's face when the bishop field broke told me something." Vritra wasn't surprised by the field breaking, he was surprised by the reason it broke. "Which means he's been modeling my abilities as conventional power, not presence-based authority." He looked at her seriously. "He's going to recalibrate. And when he comes back, it'll be with something we haven't anticipated." "Which means we use the 3 weeks well," Rias said. "Yes." Across the room, Asia had found Kaneko and was checking a bruised shoulder with the focused care of someone who found healing others genuinely satisfying rather than dutiful. Kaneko was tolerating it with the stoic resignation of someone who knows that pushing Asia away would feel worse than getting her shoulder checked. Xenovia was cleaning a cut on her forearm by herself in the corner, and Izuku crossed the room to her without planning to and sat beside her and took the cloth from her hand and finished the cleaning more thoroughly than she'd been bothering to do. She looked at him. "You didn't hold back at the end," he said. "Against the specialist. It was more efficient." "It was right," he said. "You identified the angle and you took it." He handed back the cloth. "You knew what you were doing. Don't undersell it." She looked at the clean cut on her forearm. Then at him. "You watched every fight the whole time." Yes. All of them simultaneously. It's ambient, he said. Like peripheral vision. Everything's there at once. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the careful deliberateness of someone handling something fragile, "When you saw me fight, what did you see?" He thought about what he'd actually seen. Someone who's been told her whole life that her power is the reason she's valuable. Who's spent so long making sure her power is enough that she stopped noticing the strategy around it. He met her eyes. But today you put the sword down and used your head. That was different. That was you choosing, not your power deciding. The silence was the particular kind that happens when someone has been seen accurately and is processing the strangeness of it. "You're going to be insufferable," she said. Her voice was rough in the specific way of voices that are managing an emotion they haven't named yet. "Probably," he said, which was apparently his standard response to that particular observation, and it made her look away quickly and focus very hard on her arm. Later, when the evening had settled into dinner and the specific comfort of a house that had come through something difficult and landed intact, Rias found him in the library again. He was standing at the window rather than reading, watching the night garden, thinking about Caius's face and the 3 weeks and the shape of whatever was coming. "She's going to be trouble," Rias said from the doorway. He didn't have to ask who she meant. "Xenovia. She's already trouble," he said. "That's why I like her." Rias came into the room and leaned against the bookshelf closest to him, arms crossed in the loose way rather than the formal way, which he'd come to recognize as her version of being off-duty. "You have a way with all of them," she said. "They each respond to you differently, but they all respond. Even Kaneko, and Kaneko doesn't do that." "Kaneko's just honest," he said. "She decided I wasn't going to hurt anyone she cares about and she adjusted accordingly." "And Akino?" He considered. "Akino's still deciding. But she's deciding in a direction." "And me?" she said. It was asked the same way she'd asked in the garden the previous evening, direct, deliberate, carrying a cost she was choosing to pay. He turned from the window to look at her properly. She was watching him with those deep-water eyes, in the lamplight of the library, her crimson hair over one shoulder, looking more like herself than he'd seen her look since he'd arrived, not the Gremory heir, not the king piece, not the political operator. Just her. "You," he said, "are already decided. You just haven't finished arguing with yourself about it." She held his gaze. The argument in question moved visibly through her expression, the part of her that had learned to hold everything at arm's length pushing against something else, something that had apparently decided it was tired of arm's length. Then she looked away, toward the window he'd been looking out of, and she said quietly, 3 weeks. 3 weeks, he agreed. "Make them count." "That was always the plan," he said. She pushed off the bookshelf and moved toward the door, and she was Rias Gremory again, all composure, all precision, but he could see the edges of it now, the places where it didn't quite cover the person underneath, and he thought that was probably what she'd meant to show him. He turned back to the window. 3 weeks. Vritra recalibrating. Something new coming. The garden was dark and quiet and the wards hummed at a frequency just below hearing, and somewhere east of the estate the ruins were lit from within with an ancient, patient light. He watched it for a while. Then he went to prepare. Chapter 5, What Beasts Dreamed. The summons from the Devil Council arrived on a Tuesday, which meant someone had spent the weekend drafting it carefully enough to make it feel inevitable rather than reactive. Izuku read it at the kitchen table while Asia made breakfast, and he read it twice because the language was dense in the specific way of documents that had been written by people who wanted their meaning to be clear only to the people it needed to be clear to. The summary: the 72 Pillars Coordinating Council was convening an emergency session regarding the matter of an unaffiliated sovereign entity operating within established Devil territory. His presence was formally requested. The word requested was doing the kind of work that the word required does when the person writing it wants to maintain the fiction of courtesy. Bad? Asia asked, setting a plate in front of him. Complicated, he said. Which is different. She sat across from him with her own plate, hands folded briefly in a small private prayer before she ate, a habit she'd carried from her old life that she'd never stopped and apparently never intended to. "Is there anything I can do?" He looked at her. Asia Argento had a quality that he'd noticed early and kept noticing, the specific wholeness of someone who'd had everything taken from them and chosen, consciously and continuously, to keep being themselves anyway. She'd been exiled from the church, reincarnated as a devil, dropped into a world that had tried to destroy her from multiple directions, and she made breakfast and prayed before meals and checked everyone's injuries with the same patient care. "You already do it," he said. "Every morning." She turned pink and became very focused on her eggs. He read the summons again. 3 days to respond and 7 days to appear. The session was at the Pillar Council's primary assembly hall, a formal space, which meant formal rules, which meant certain protections applied that wouldn't apply in an informal encounter. That was useful. What was less useful was the list of council members who'd signed the summons. 12 names, most of them neutral or unaffiliated with Vritra's known network. But 2 names at the bottom, co-signatories rather than primary signers, their names listed as supporting the validity of the session, were pillar members he'd mapped as Vritra adjacent in the historical records. Vritra hadn't called this session. But he'd helped make it possible. Izuku set the letter down and ate his breakfast and thought about the shape of it. Rias took the news with the composure of someone who'd been half expecting it and had spent the time since either dreading it or preparing for it and had apparently chosen the latter. "The full council session," she said. "Not a subcommittee hearing." "Full session," he confirmed. 72 seats, majority required for binding decisions. Binding decisions about what? Xenovia asked. She was at the training room entrance, wrapping her hands, having come from an early session. She had the focused energy of someone who'd been sleeping less than usual and working more, and he noted it without commenting because telling Xenovia to sleep more was the kind of advice that would have precisely the effect of making her sleep less on principle. Technically the session is about clarifying the status of an unaffiliated sovereign entity under current devil law, Izuku said. Practically it's about whether 72 pillar members can be collectively pressured into voting to classify me as a destabilizing presence and authorizing formal action against me. Can they? Kiba asked. The math is interesting, Izuku said. Vritra needs 37 votes for majority. He controls or strongly influences maybe 12 to 15 seats directly. The question is how many he can move through secondary pressure, economic ties, favor networks, political obligations. He looked at Rias. You know these people better than I do. She was already thinking. He could see it, the specific internal motion of someone running a calculation they'd been maintaining for a long time. Vritra's hard alignment is around 12, she confirmed. His soft influence probably reaches another 8 to 10. That's 20 to 22 at the high end. She paused. He needs 15 more. Fear, Aquino said quietly. She was in the doorway, cup in hand, and her voice had the quality of someone contributing from experience rather than analysis. He doesn't need those 15 to be his allies. He just needs them to be afraid of what happens if they vote against him. Yes, Rias said. So the question is what they're afraid of, Izuku said. He looked around the room. What do neutral pillar members fear most about a new Beast King? The room was quiet. Disruption, Kiba said thoughtfully. The current hierarchy is stable. It's oppressive in specific ways and unfair in specific ways, but it's predictable. Stability has value to people who've built their security on top of it. The last Beast King nearly unmade the old power structure, Rias said. That's in the historical record. Every pillar member knows it. So I need to be the opposite of that, Izuku said. He sat back. I need to walk into that room and be the least threatening version of myself that I can possibly be, while simultaneously being too substantial to dismiss. He looked at Rias. What's the dress code? She blinked, apparently not having expected that question. Formal. High formal, Devil Court standard. Right, he said. I'm going to need different clothes. The following 7 days were the most quietly intense period since he'd arrived in this world. During the days, he prepared for the council session, reading everything available about the 72 pillars, their histories, their affiliations, their particular vanities and pressures. He mapped Vritra's influence network with the same methodical patience he'd once used to map villain organizations, looking for the seams. He wrote nothing down, which was a habit from his old life that had become instinctive. Documentation was evidence could be found, memory was portable and private. During the evenings, things shifted. It started with Rosweiss. She'd arrived at the estate on the 4th day, a Norse Valkyrie, compact and precise, recently released from Odin's service and currently attached to Rias's household in a kind of extended diplomatic residency that was functionally an employment arrangement neither party had completely formalized. She was competent in the way of people who've been competent for so long that they've stopped receiving recognition for it and have quietly stopped expecting to, which created a specific kind of invisible quality about her. Izuku noticed her in the training room on her first evening, running solo drills with a magical array that was technically flawless and entirely focused, and he stopped in the doorway and watched for a while before she became aware of him. She startled. I didn't know anyone was using this space. I'm not using it, I'm watching, he said. Your array geometry is exceptional. She looked at him with the expression of someone receiving an unexpected compliment and not knowing the correct response because they haven't been given enough compliments to have developed a protocol. Thank you, she said, carefully. The third sequence, he said. You break the flow there. Not because you can't maintain it, your control is too good for it to be a technique problem. You're interrupting yourself. She looked at the array. Back at him. I've been told the third sequence is unnecessary complexity. Who told you that? Several instructors at Asgard. A pause, Lord Odin mentioned it once. Odin mentioned it once and you've been self-correcting for it ever since, he said. Not accusingly. Try it without the break. All the way through. She looked at him for a moment with the specific calculation of someone deciding whether to trust a suggestion from someone they've just met. Then she turned back to her array and ran the sequence without interrupting herself in the third movement. The result was immediately, visibly different, the array expanding to its full intended scope, the geometry completing itself the way a sentence completes when you stop cutting it short. It was extraordinary work. He could see why she'd been told it was unnecessary. It was also powerful in a way that made certain people uncomfortable. She stared at the completed array. It works, she said. It always worked, he said. Someone convinced you it was too much. She dismissed the array and turned to face him fully, and there was something in her expression that was taking careful inventory, not of him, exactly, but of the moment. The specific feeling of a thing that's been suppressed for a long time being given room. I'm Rosweiss, she said. Izuku, he said. I know. Rias mentioned you'd be arriving. She didn't mention you. That tracks, he said, because it genuinely did. Rias had a quality of letting things develop without too much advanced narrative, which was probably a deliberate philosophy as much as a personality trait. Are you what they say? Rosweiss asked. Direct, in the way of someone who decided that oblique approaches cost more energy than they saved. The Beast King? Yes. She processed this. And you're going before the 72 pillars. In 3 days. She was quiet for a moment. Then, they'll try to reduce you. Rhetorically. They'll frame the session in language that positions you as a problem to be managed rather than an entity to be addressed. Standard political diminishment technique. She paused. I've been in a lot of divine council chambers. The architecture is different but the tactics are the same. Tell me, he said. She did. For 2 hours she walked him through the specific mechanics of high court political maneuvering from the perspective of someone who'd spent decades in them as a junior figure, watching, absorbing, never quite given a seat at the table but always present enough to learn how the table worked. She was precise and comprehensive, and she spoke without the hedging quality that had been in her voice when she talked about her own abilities. When she finished, he said, "You should be advising Rias's political strategy." "I do," she said. "Occasionally." When asked. "You should be doing it continuously," he said. "Not when asked. You have more applicable knowledge in this specific domain than anyone in this house." She looked at him with that inventory expression again. "People don't generally," she started. "I know," he said. "They should." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away, and something in her posture was slightly different than before, not transformed, nothing so dramatic, just the fraction of change that happens when a door that's been closed a long time opens a small amount. "Good luck at the session," she said. "Come with me," he said. She blinked. "I'm not, I need someone who knows how those rooms work, standing where I can see them." He met her eyes. "You don't have to say anything. Just be there." The pause was long enough to contain several internal arguments she was apparently having with herself. "All right," she said finally. On the 5th day, Kaneko found him in the library at 2 in the morning. He wasn't surprised she was awake. Kaneko operated on a schedule that seemed unrelated to conventional circadian rhythms. She dropped onto the couch across from him with a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of something warm, and she looked at him with those flat, serious eyes. "You're not sleeping," she said. "I'm working," he said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive, but you're using one to avoid the other." She drank from her cup. "I do it too. When something's ahead that I don't want to think about, I stay busy until I run out of day." He looked at her. "What do you not want to think about?" "The session," she said simply. "If they vote against you, what happens?" He set down his notes. "What do you think happens?" "I think Vritra's faction is authorized to take action." "I think action is defined loosely enough to mean almost anything." She was matter-of-fact about it in the way she was matter-of-fact about most things, not because she didn't feel it but because feeling it and stating it clearly weren't mutually exclusive. "I think you'd fight. I think that fighting would escalate. And I think people around you would get hurt." "People around me might get hurt either way," he said. "I know." She looked at him. "That's what I'm not sleeping about." He was quiet for a moment, sitting with the honesty of it. "Kaneko," he said, "when you decided I wasn't going to hurt anyone you care about, was that a conclusion you reached, or a bet you made?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Somewhere in between," she said finally. "You're the first person who's been in this house that didn't arrive through obligation or history. You came from outside all of it. And you didn't try to use that." She paused. "Most people, when they have no obligations, maximize their advantage. You didn't." "I had everything I needed," he said. "I wasn't going to take more." "I know," she said. "That's why it was more conclusion than bet." She drank from her cup. "Don't get hurt at the session." "I'll try," he said. "Don't try," she said, with the specific firmness of someone who has learned that trying is what people say when they're leaving room for failure. "Just don't." He almost smiled. "All right. I won't." She tucked her feet under her on the couch and stared at the ceiling and stayed there, in the quiet library, and he went back to his notes, and they kept each other company in the 2 in the morning way of people who've reached the particular kind of trust that doesn't need to be announced. On the 6th evening, Aquino came to him. Not in the library, not in the training room. She knocked on his door at the end of the wing at 9 in the evening, which was a deliberate choice, private, direct, not the incidental encounter she might have constructed to give herself an exit route. He opened the door. She was wearing her own clothes rather than the school uniform or the formal wear she sometimes adopted for evening, simple, dark, without the careful assembly that was usually part of her public presentation. She looked like herself in the way that he was coming to think was the best version of her, and she was standing in the doorway with an expression that said she'd made a decision and was committing to it. "Can I come in?" she said. "Yes," he said, and stepped back. She came in and sat on the edge of the low table by the window, not the chair, which would have been comfortable and therefore safe, but the table, which put her slightly below his eye level if he stood and slightly above it if he sat on the floor, a position that had no built-in power dynamic. He sat on the floor. "I want to tell you something," she said. "All right." "My father was a fallen angel," she said. "Barakil. My mother was a shrine maiden. They loved each other." She said it simply, without the bracing quality of someone revealing something painful, more like someone stating a fact they've spent a long time deciding they're not ashamed of. "My mother's people killed her because of it. Because the connection was considered impure. And I spent a long time after that performing the impure thing as completely as I could because if they were going to condemn me for what I was going to be all of it." She met his eyes. "That's why the performance." He was quiet. "I'm not telling you this because you asked," she said. "I'm telling you because you saw it without asking, and you didn't do anything with what you saw, and I wanted you to have the whole picture instead of just the part you inferred." "Why does it matter what picture I have?" he asked. Not challenging, actually asking. She held his gaze for a moment. The smile was entirely absent now, not even as reflex. She looked very clear. "Because you're going into a room in 2 days where people are going to try to define what you are and use that definition against you," she said. "And you deserve to go in there knowing that at least one person in this house sees you fully and isn't afraid of it." He sat with that. "Half-fallen angel," he said. "Which means the area suppression field the other day was specifically designed to target you." "Yes." No hesitation. "And you still fought under it." "I couldn't do much but I could do something." A pause. "I don't stop because it's hard. I stop because it's done." He looked at her. She looked back. The room was quiet around them, the night garden visible through the window, the warded estate humming its constant low note. "Thank you," he said. "For telling me." She nodded once. Then she stayed, and they talked, not about Vritra, not about the session, not about any of the things pressing in from the near future. About smaller things. About what his world had been like. About what it felt like to fly when you had lightning in your hands. About whether the best thing Asia had ever made was the katsudon or the apple tart and whether this was a debate or a settled matter. She left at midnight, and when she went her smile was back but it was different, not the constructed thing, just an expression on a human face. He sat by the window and watched the garden for a while. Then he slept, properly, for the first time in 6 days. The council chamber was everything the architecture wanted it to be, vast, circular, tiered seating descending toward a central floor that was designed to put whoever stood on it below the sightline of everyone watching, which was probably intentional and was absolutely not a coincidence. The stone was old, older than anything in Kuo, older than the estate, the kind of old that had absorbed so much history it had become a presence in itself. 72 seats. Maybe 60 occupied when he arrived, the rest filtering in over the following 20 minutes. He stood on the central floor and felt all of them above him and didn't adjust his posture by a single degree. Rias was in the observer gallery to his left. Rosweiss was 3 seats from her, upright, watchful, and he caught her eye once as he entered and she gave him a single precise nod that contained the briefing of the previous 4 evenings compressed into a single gesture. Vritra was in the chamber. He was in the 17th seat of the second tier, which was neither the most prominent position nor an obscure one, chosen, Izuku understood immediately, to be visible without seeming to be the center of the session. He was older in appearance than Caius, with the quality of someone whose age was genuinely deep rather than presentation, silver-haired, still, watching with the kind of attention that had been refined over centuries into something almost frictionless. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a person who had learned, a very long time ago, that looking like a threat was inefficient. He looked at Izuku as Izuku found him in the seating, and something passed between them, not greeting exactly, not acknowledgement exactly. The specific quality of two people who have been thinking about each other for some time finally occupying the same room. The session convener, a thin woman in formal robes who radiated the specific energy of someone who would rather be dealing with a straightforward matter of procedure than whatever this was, called the chamber to order and began the formal recitation of the session's purpose. Izuku listened to the language carefully. Ross Weiss had been right. The framing was designed to position him as the matter under discussion rather than a party to the discussion, which was a subtle but significant difference. The entity in question. The situation requiring clarity. Language that made him a problem with a file number rather than a person with standing. When the convener finished, she looked at him and said, "The entity is invited to present its position." Its position. Not his. Its. He let the specific choice of pronouns sit in the chamber for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said, "I appreciate the invitation. Before I present anything, I want to clarify a point of procedure." The convener looked slightly surprised. "The floor is, the session summary uses entity language rather than sovereign language," he said. "Given that my claim on the ruins east of Kuo has been formally registered and acknowledged by multiple pillar witnesses under the unaligned Accord's sovereign entity provision, the procedural designation should reflect that." He looked up at the tiers calmly. "I'm raising this now rather than later because the designation matters for what protections apply to this session's outcomes. If the council would prefer to reframe, I'm happy to wait." The silence was the particular kind that happens in formal chambers when someone has just made a technically correct procedural argument that nobody prepared for. In the 17th seat, Vritra's expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes recalibrated. The convener conferred quietly with 2 colleagues for approximately 45 seconds. "The designation is adjusted to sovereign entity," she said, with the clipped professionalism of someone revising their notes without enjoying it. "Please continue." "Thank you," he said. "My position is straightforward. I arrived in this world unintentionally. I claimed the throne of the Beast King not by choice but by recognition. The ruins identified me, not the other way around. I have operated since my arrival under the unaligned Accord. I've taken no hostile action against any pillar member or affiliated entity. I've caused no territorial disruption." He paused. "I have defended myself when attacked and I've protected the territory of a pillar noble who extended hospitality. Both of those are within every relevant legal framework." He looked up at the tiers. 60 seats, 60 people, 60 calculations running simultaneously. "The fear in this room," he said, not accusingly, not dramatically, just stating it, "is understandable. The historical record on the previous Beast King is alarming. But I'd suggest that the record tells you more about the political conditions that made the previous king a threat than about the title itself." He found a specific face in the second tier, a senior pillar member he'd identified in his research as genuinely neutral, someone whose vote would matter. The previous king was opposed on sight. Hunted before he'd done anything. Pushed into conflict before he had alternatives. A beat. If you want a different outcome this time, the most direct path is to not repeat the same approach. The chamber was very quiet. "I'm not here to unmake your hierarchy," he said. "I'm not here to take territory or challenge authority or destabilize anything. I'm here because this is where I woke up and I'm making the best of it." He let the plainness of that sit. "That's the complete truth of my position." He stopped. He'd said what needed saying. More words would dilute it. The questions came from the floor, formal procedure, pillar members directing questions through the convener or directly based on seniority. Most were genuinely curious, and he answered those fully and honestly. Some were adversarial, angled to get him to say something that could be reframed, and he recognized each one and answered the actual question underneath the asked question, which was more disarming than arguing the framing. Then a pillar member in the 4th tier, someone he hadn't specifically mapped, older, with the weight of someone who'd been in these sessions for a very long time, said, "You speak well of peaceful intent. But the Beast King authority is not a peaceful thing. It is an ancient power that predates every compact we have built. How do we trust that the person holding it will remain the person we're speaking to now, rather than becoming something the authority makes them? The question landed differently than the others. He understood why. It was the real one. Not political maneuvering, not legal positioning. The actual fear, stated plainly by someone old enough to have stopped performing. He thought about One for All. About what it felt like to carry something that large. I've held power that wasn't originally mine before, he said. In another life. Power that came from someone else, through a chain of people who'd suffered to pass it on. It was supposed to make me into a symbol as much as a fighter. He looked at the fourth tier. I spent years learning where it ended and I began. That's not a problem you solve once. It's a practice. You decide, continuously, that you are the one making choices, not the power. He paused. The Beast King authority responds to what I am. It doesn't determine what I am. That distinction is the whole answer. The chamber was quiet for a long time. Then Vritra spoke. Not through a question to the convener. Directly, from his seat, with the measured cadence of someone who'd chosen the moment carefully. The boy speaks with conviction, he said. I don't doubt his sincerity. He looked at Izuku from the 17th seat with those centuries-deep eyes. What I doubt is the durability of sincerity under pressure. The previous king was also sincere, in the beginning. A pause. What makes him different? The chamber waited. Izuku looked at Vritra directly. Not with hostility, with genuine attention. He'd been thinking about Vritra for weeks, building a picture of who this person was from every available source, and the picture was of someone genuinely intelligent, genuinely cautious, genuinely shaped by 3,000 years of institutional maintenance. Not a monster. Not even a villain in any straightforward sense. A person who'd looked at history and drawn a specific conclusion and committed to it so completely it had become his identity. I can't prove it to you in advance, Izuku said. You're right about that. Words aren't proof. He held Vritra's gaze. But here's what I can tell you. The previous king was isolated. Hunted. Driven into a corner before he had time to be anything else. I'm standing in a room with 72 pillars, speaking freely, because I walked in here and asked for the procedural adjustment and you gave it to me. He paused. The difference isn't me. It's the room. It's whether the power structures around me choose to make me into the threat they're afraid of, or choose to leave room for something else. He didn't look away from Vritra. That choice belongs to you. Vritra was still for a moment. His expression didn't shift. But something in the chamber's atmosphere had changed, the quality of the collective attention, the calculus of 60 people running 60 versions of the same question. The vote, when it came 40 minutes later, was 41 against formal action and 19 for. 22 abstentions, which was its own kind of statement. Izuku stood on the central floor and heard the count and kept his face exactly as it was. He didn't exhale until he was in the corridor outside. Rosweiss found him first, because she'd been closest. 41, she said. That's better than I expected, he said honestly. By about 8 votes. The procedural challenge at the start. She said it like she was confirming a hypothesis. It reframed the entire session's tone. Everyone in the room adjusted to you as a legal actor rather than a matter under discussion. That's what you told me it would do, he said. You were right. She looked at him with that inventory expression, and this time there was something warmer in it, not performed warmth, just the actual version. You're very good at using good advice, she said. That's the whole skill, he said. Everything else is just finding people who know things. Rias reached them 30 seconds later, moving through the corridor with the precision of someone who'd mapped the exits before entering, and she looked at him with an expression that had bypassed all composure and was just relief. Clear, unguarded, 3 weeks of careful preparation landing in a single exhaled breath. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, 41. Yes. Vritra's speech was a concession, she said. Did you hear it that way? He was reframing his position in front of the chamber, Izuku said. Not conceding the conflict. Positioning himself as the reasonable skeptic rather than the open aggressor. He's moving the battle somewhere else. He met her eyes. He's not done. He just changed the terrain. I know. She held his gaze. Are you alright? The question landed personally. He checked himself honestly, not the political outcome, not the strategic implications, but how he actually felt. Tired, he said. In a specific way. The kind where you've been holding something very carefully for a long time and you finally set it down. Something crossed her expression that was warm and real and entirely hers. Come home, she said. Then she seemed to hear the word she'd used and looked away briefly, the composure reasserting. He chose not to make anything of it. They walked out into the open air together, and Rosweiss fell into step on his left, and behind them the council chamber was already refilling with the next session's participants, and the 72 pillars were going back to their lives, and Vritra was somewhere in the building having a very different conversation than the one he'd planned to have today. But the afternoon was clear, and Kuo was 30 minutes away, and Asia was probably making something warm for dinner, and Kaneko had texted him 3 words, "How did it go?" which was, from Kaneko, essentially a declaration. He texted back, 41 for us. The reply came in 4 seconds, good. There are chips. He put his phone in his pocket and looked at the open sky and thought that 41 votes and chips and the word home said plainly in a corridor, that was enough. That was, actually, more than enough. For tonight. Because Vritra was still out there, recalibrating, and whatever he was building toward was going to be worse than anything that had come before, and the 3 weeks of preparation time were almost up. But that was tomorrow. Tonight he walked through the open air and let the weight go, and the sky was that too deep purple with the luminous threading that he'd never quite gotten used to and never wanted to, and the world felt like something he belonged in, fully, for the first time since he'd woken up in the ruins with someone else's name carved in stone beneath him. It still felt that way. He was going to make sure it stayed that way. Chapter 6, Sovereign. The attack came before dawn, which was either bad planning or very good planning depending on whether you thought Vritra had misjudged his moment or deliberately chosen the hour when defenses were thinnest and bodies were deepest in sleep. Izuku was awake when it started, which meant Vritra had misjudged. He'd been sitting in the garden since 3 in the morning, not from anxiety, he'd slept, properly, better than the 6 days before the session, but from the specific alertness of someone whose instincts had been sending a low-frequency signal for 12 hours that they hadn't been able to articulate yet. He'd learned, in his old life, that the body knew things before the mind organized them. He'd learned to sit with that knowledge and wait for it to become language. It became language at 4:47 in the morning. Not gradually. All at once, like a switch. 7 signatures, approaching from the north and east simultaneously. Not scouts, not proxies, not contractors given incomplete information. These were heavy, the kind of weight that only came from entities that had been refining themselves for decades or centuries, the difference between a knife and a siege engine. 2 of them were at pillar-adjacent power levels. The other 5 were among the most capable combatants he'd felt since arriving in this world. And at the center of the approaching formation, steady and cold and patient as he'd always been, Vritra himself. Not a proxy. Not a managed distance operation. Personal. Izuku was on his feet before he'd finished processing it. He moved through the garden door, through the hall, and started waking people in the specific order that the next 15 minutes would require. Rias first. She came awake in 2 seconds, which confirmed she'd been sleeping lightly. She'd felt something too, even if she hadn't acted on it. He put a hand briefly on her doorframe and said, Vritra. 7. He's with them. 12 minutes, and she was already moving before he finished. Kiba and Xenovia next, back to back, because their response time was fastest and he needed them on the perimeter before the formation reached the outer wards. Then Aquino, who he didn't have to say anything to, she opened her door and looked at him, and the lightning was already in her hands, the performance entirely absent, just Aquino at full clarity. Then Rosweiss, who had the specific gift of going from sleep to operational in a way that made him think her Asgard training had included some very unpleasant mornings. Asia he went to last. Not because she mattered less, the opposite. Because what he needed to say to her required a different kind of moment. He knocked. She opened the door in her sleep clothes, hair loose, eyes wide but calm in the way that Asia was almost always calm, not from absence of fear but from the specific courage of someone who decided that the world's difficulty didn't change what she was going to do about it. "They're coming," he said. "I know," she said. "I felt it through the ward, something hit the outer layer 30 seconds ago." She looked at him. "What do you need from me?" "Stay in the secondary position," he said. "Center of the house. Rosweiss will be with you. If anyone needs healing, they come to you, you don't go to them, not until I say it's clear." He held her gaze. "Can you do that?" She wanted to argue. He could see it, the healer's instinct pushing against containment. But she looked at him and made the decision that was harder for her than fighting would have been. "Yes," she said. "Thank you," he said, and meant it fully. He went back to the garden. Kiba and Xenovia were already at the outer wall when he arrived, which was fast enough to confirm they'd been half-ready themselves. Kiba had his swords out, both of them, which was the clearest possible indicator of how he'd assessed the incoming, and Xenovia had Durandal blazing at her side with the steady white light of something that had been holy for 1,000 years and had never once had a doubt about it. Rias was behind them, her power running at full depth for the first time he'd seen it, the deep red-black of destruction filling the air around her in a way that was controlled but barely, like something kept in shape by will rather than structure. Aquino floated above the garden, which she apparently just did when she was serious about things, lightning wrapping both her arms to the elbow. Izuku stood at the center of them all. The outer ward broke. Not dramatically, it went out the way a light goes out, a clean cessation, which was worse than a dramatic rupture because it said whoever had done it knew exactly how it was built. The second ward layer went 40 seconds later. Then the formation came over the wall. 2 pillar-level combatants first, large, shaped like humans but with the specific density of something that had grown into its power over a very long time, their energy signatures resonating like struck bells. Behind them the 5 specialists spread into a wide arc, each one with the distinct quality of a person who had a single thing they did exceptionally well and had built everything around it. And behind all of them, walking through the gap in the outer wall with the unhurried confidence of someone who has decided the outcome already, Vritra. He was taller in person than the political impression had suggested. Silver-haired, precise, wearing clothes that were formal without being ceremonial, the choice of someone who wanted to be clear this was business, not ritual. His power was very quiet. That was the most alarming thing about it, the absolute compression of something enormous held perfectly still. He looked at Izuku and said, "I want you to know that I voted against the emergency session." "I know," Izuku said. A slight pause. "You know. You didn't need the session. The session was a favor to your aligned members who wanted a legal process before direct action. You've always been comfortable with direct action." Izuku met his eyes across the width of the garden. "You're here because the session confirmed what I said in the chamber, that I'm not going to disappear, I'm not going to be easily managed, and every month I'm in this world I become harder to remove without significant cost." A beat. "So you decided the cost is lower now than it will be later." Vritra was quiet for a moment. "You're quite good at that. Reading people. Reading situations." He looked at the assembled peerage behind Izuku with an expression that was genuinely respectful and entirely unmoved by it. "I want you to understand that this isn't personal. The previous Beast King was also not personally my enemy. But his existence destabilized structures that took centuries to build and cost enormous amounts of life to rebuild." He looked back at Izuku. "I will not watch that happen again." "It won't," Izuku said. "I believe you believe that," Vritra said. I don't think belief is sufficient protection. Then let me show you, Izuku said. Not in a council chamber. Not in a political argument. He looked at Vritra steadily. You came here to end this. I understand the logic. But you should also understand that you came here thinking you knew what you were dealing with, and you don't. Not fully. He let the Beast King presence settle fully into the air, not aggressive, not threatening, just completely and entirely present, the full depth of what he was occupying the garden without apology. So before anyone gets hurt, you should know what you're actually looking at. The garden changed. It didn't transform physically. The stone and the plants and the night air were exactly as they'd been. But the quality of the space shifted, the same way it had in the raiding game venue but fuller, more complete, the way something sounds different in its natural environment than through a recording. The Beast King resonance didn't radiate outward the way conventional power did. It was more like it revealed itself, the way a deep color looks different when the right light hits it. The two pillar-level combatants stopped. Not by order. By instinct. Their signatures, which had been steady and battle-ready, developed a quality that Izuku recognized, the same quality the stray had shown in the street, and the great stag at the ruins. Not submission. Not fear. Something older and more structural than either, the recognition of something that existed in a category above the framework they'd built their understanding of power on. One of the 5 specialists took a step backward without appearing to choose to. Vritra looked at Izuku. His expression had not changed. His composure was, genuinely, extraordinary, centuries of practice, the kind of self-possession that didn't flinch at things that would break most people's control completely. But his power, that compressed enormous stillness, had developed a quality that hadn't been there before. Not fear. Something more like, recalibration. The sensation of someone who has encountered data that doesn't fit the model and is deciding what the model requires. That, Vritra said, very quietly, is different from the records. I know, Izuku said. The records are 3,000 years old. And the previous king was, as you said, isolated. Hunted. He kept his voice level. What I am now is what happens when this title has time to settle into someone who isn't trying to survive against the people around them. He looked at Vritra. The records describe a weapon. I'm not that. What are you? Vritra asked. It was the first time he'd heard genuine inquiry in the man's voice, underneath everything else. Something new, Izuku said. Same title. Different person. The garden was very still. The pre-dawn sky above them was that deep purple, the luminous threading visible at the eastern edge where the first light was beginning to think about arriving, and in the silence between them the full weight of 3,000 years of history was present but not governing, the way the past is present but not determining when someone finally makes a different choice. Vritra looked at him for a very long time. Then he looked at his assembled force, the pillar-level combatants, the 5 specialists, and something passed through his expression that was private and internal and the most human thing Izuku had seen from him. Stand down, he said. The 2 words went through the formation like a current. Not confused, not argued, executed, immediately, because Vritra's people were professionals and he was their authority and his authority had never, apparently, been questioned. This doesn't resolve the underlying question, Vritra said to Izuku. Your existence in this world is still a structural challenge to arrangements that were built without accounting for you. I know, Izuku said. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. What are you asking? Time, Izuku said. Room to demonstrate the difference between what I am and what the records say I should be. He held Vritra's gaze. You've spent 3,000 years managing this world carefully. I'm not asking you to stop. I'm asking you to update your model and give the new data a fair evaluation before you act on the old one. Vritra was quiet. And if the new data eventually tells me the threat assessment was correct, he asked. Then you'll have better information than you have now, Izuku said. And you can make a better decision. The specific quality of a person who has argued a position for 3 millennia encountering a counterargument they cannot immediately dismiss moved through Vritra's expression. "You're asking me to accept a period of uncertainty," he said. "I'm asking you to accept that uncertainty is already what you have," Izuku said. "You came here tonight because you weren't certain a later move would succeed. That's uncertainty. I'm just asking you to use it differently." Another long silence. Then Vritra said, 6 months. Izuku kept his expression still. 6 months, Vritra repeated. "During which I will be watching. During which any action that validates the historical threat assessment ends the arrangement." He looked at Izuku with the deep, weathered regard of someone who has made many decisions over a very long life and knows exactly how much weight each one carries. "If at 6 months the assessment has not been validated, we discussed the matter as parties with mutual standing. It was not friendship. It was not alliance. It was the minimum viable peace offered by someone who was too intelligent to continue a conflict he wasn't certain of winning and too principled to pretend that uncertainty didn't exist." 6 months, Izuku said. "Agreed." Vritra held his gaze for one more moment. Then he turned and walked back through the gap in the outer ward, and his formation followed, and the garden was quiet again, and the first actual light of dawn was beginning to edge over the eastern tree line in a color that was somewhere between gold and that impossible not quite aurora that Izuku had never found a word for. Nobody moved for about 10 seconds. Then Xenovia said, "That's it." "That's it," Izuku said. "He came with 2 pillar-level combatants and 5 specialists and he just recalibrated," Izuku said. "He's pragmatic. When the cost-benefit shifted he adjusted." He looked at her. "That's not weakness. That's actually what makes him dangerous. He doesn't have ego invested in specific outcomes. He has investment in the larger goal, and he'll use whatever path gets him there." 6 months, Kiba said. He was sheathing his swords with the careful motions of someone bringing themselves down from full combat readiness. "That's not much time." "It's enough time to make it a year," Izuku said. "And then another year. If the 6 months go well he doesn't have a clean justification for revisiting the arrangement. Not without losing political face in the council." Rias was looking at him. She'd been looking at him since Vritra's formation stood down, and she had the expression of someone sorting through several simultaneous reactions and not yet having filed them in order. When she finally spoke it wasn't about Vritra. "You let that through," she said. "The full presence. You've been keeping it contained since you got here." "Not contained," he said. "Just, level. I wasn't suppressing it, I was just not amplifying it." "And tonight you amplified it." "Yes." "Why tonight and not before?" He thought about how to answer that honestly. Because before tonight, using it fully would have been about winning an encounter. Tonight it was about showing him something true. He met her eyes. There's a difference between deploying power and revealing it. One is a tactic. The other is, trust, she said. He nodded. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked at the damaged outer wall, the broken ward structure, the garden that had held the weight of something enormous without breaking, and she said, very quietly, "Everyone inside. Breakfast." It was the most Rias Gremory thing she'd ever said, and somehow it was exactly right. Asia made katsudon. Not because it was a special occasion, she'd clearly started it before the confrontation, which meant she'd been cooking at 4 in the morning out of the particular instinct of someone who processes uncertainty through nourishment. By the time everyone was seated and the ward damage had been assessed and Rossweiss had drafted a repair sequence on a notepad with the focused efficiency of someone who found order comforting after disorder, the food was ready. They ate. All of them, around the too small table with the chairs slightly overlapping and the morning light coming in through the east windows at the specific angle of early day, and nobody said anything important for about 8 minutes. Then Kaneko said, "Good katsudon, Asia." "Thank you," Asia said. "Agreed," Kiba said. "The balance is different today," Akino said, thoughtfully. "Less sweet. Better. I adjusted the recipe, Asia said. She was pleased in the way she was always pleased, genuinely, without performance, the pleasure of someone who'd done something carefully and had it noticed. Izuku mentioned last week that the sweetness was slightly high. Everyone looked at him. It was slightly high, he said. You critique Asia's cooking? Xenovia said. Not accusingly, with the specific tone of someone who finds this genuinely interesting data. I made a suggestion, he said. She didn't have to use it. It was a good suggestion, Asia said firmly. Thank you, Asia. Kaneko ate another bite. The world is different now, she said. It wasn't dramatic, she said it the way she said most things, clean and direct, the observation stripped of any decoration. Vritra stood down. That's never happened before. Not to anyone. It happened because of what he is, Rias said. She was looking at her food, not at him, with the deliberate attention of someone choosing not to look somewhere because looking there directly is complicated. What the ruins recognized. What the stag recognized. A pause. What the session recognized, even when they were trying not to. And what the ward damage shows, Rosweiss said, in the matter-of-fact tone she used when contributing information she thought was relevant. Those outer wards took a serious working from entities at pillar-adjacent level. They broke in a controlled way. Nothing inside the perimeter was touched. She looked at Izuku. The inner wards held because of the resonance anchoring them to the ruins. Not because of their independent strength. The ruins are a force multiplier, Izuku said. For anything you anchor to them, yes. Rosweiss looked at her notepad. The repair will take me 4 days if I work the sessions alone. 2 if someone assists. I'll help, Kiba said immediately. I would also help, Asia said, but I think my contribution would be limited to encouragement. Encouragement has a non-zero value, Rosweiss said, with the precise sincerity of someone who had not always received encouragement and knew its actual weight. Across the table, Akino was watching Izuku with the expression she'd been carrying since his door 2 evenings ago, something fully present behind the eyes, the performance entirely offline in the morning light. She caught his gaze and held it for a moment and then looked back at her food, and the corner of her mouth moved in something small and real. Xenovia, on his other side, was closer than she usually sat, with the specific unceremonious closeness of someone who'd stopped negotiating the distance. She was eating with her usual focused dedication and she said, without looking up, "You're going to fight again. 6 months won't be the end of it." "No," he agreed. "So we keep training." "Yes. And the next time someone comes through the outer ward," she said, "we don't wait for you to handle it first." He looked at her. She was still focused on her food, her jaw set in the particular way it set when she'd made a decision she was committing to regardless of input. "I never asked you to wait," he said. "No," she said. "But you were out in the garden at 4 in the morning by yourself." She looked at him now. "You don't have to be by yourself." The table was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "Good," she said, and went back to her food. Later, when the table had cleared and the morning had settled into its ordinary rhythms, Rosweiss and Kiba at the outer wall, Asia in the kitchen, Kaneko apparently napping on the main room couch with the chip bag as her companion, Izuku went to the ruins. He went alone, not because he needed to but because some things required being witnessed by yourself first before they could mean what they meant in the presence of others. The eastern forest was morning-lit now, the arterial leaves open and the light coming through them in long slants, turning everything a particular shade that was red and gold and the specific quality of a world that was very much alive. The ruins were quiet. They were always quiet, but this was the quiet of something that had recently been very loud in the way of the very still being loud, presence rather than sound. He walked to the central stone and stood beside it, not touching it, just near it. The crown inscription was lit from beneath. It had been since he'd claimed it, a low constant light that had never gone out, and it was different from what it had been before. The carving itself had changed fractionally, subtly, the way things change when they become what they were always supposed to be. Vacant was gone. Waiting was gone. Just the crown, and the text that surrounded it, and the text now said something that took him a moment to read. Here stands the sovereign. Present. He stood there for a while, in the morning light, with the forest around him and the light in the stone and the weight of 6 weeks since he'd woken up here settling into something that had the quality of ground rather than water, not finished, not resolved, but solid. Something to stand on. The great stag came again. It always came when he was here, which he'd stopped finding remarkable and started finding comfortable. It emerged from the far tree line and walked to the edge of the ruins and stood there with its starlight-patterned coat and its ocean-colored eyes and the particular dignity of something very old and not at all diminished by it. He looked at it. It looked at him. "Good morning," he said. It lowered its head in the not-quite bow that was their greeting. He'd started returning it, which felt right. He thought about Vritra, walking back through the broken ward with his formation following. He thought about 61 council seats and the specific math of 19 against. He thought about 6 months and what they could be filled with if filled deliberately. He thought about the people in the house behind him, Rias with her political mind and her loneliness and the word home said plainly in a corridor. Aquino with her lightning and the door that had opened a small amount and stayed open. Xenovia with her bluntness and the particular courage it took to say you don't have to be by yourself. Asia with her prayers and her adjusted katsudon recipe and the quality of someone who had survived everything the world had tried to do to her by the simple method of refusing to stop being herself. Kaneko and her flat serious eyes and the 2 in the morning library and the text that said good, there are chips. Rosweiss and her exceptional array geometry and the things she'd said about using good advice. He'd arrived in this world with nothing. With less than nothing, with no documentation, no money, no connections, and a threat on his existence before he'd been here 24 hours. He'd arrived carrying the accumulated weight of a life already spent, a body rebuilt, a title carved in stone that he hadn't asked for. 6 weeks later he had a student ID and a stipend and a repaired futon and a kitchen that always smelled like something Asia was making, and people who had chosen him, not through peerage contracts or political obligation or the formal mechanisms of this world's power structures, but the way people choose things when they're being honest about what they want. That was worth more than the ruins. Worth more than the title. Worth more than Vritra's 6 months or the 41 council votes or any of the political architecture he'd been carefully building. He looked at the inscription in the stone. Present, it said. Yes, he thought. That's the whole thing, actually. He turned away from the stone and walked back toward the tree line, and the great stag fell into step beside him, just for a few paces, before it turned back toward the deep forest, and the morning light was very clear and very gold and the world was entirely itself and so was he. Rias was on the garden steps again when he returned, which was starting to feel like their place the way places become theirs, not by decision but by repetition, by the accumulation of moments that happen there until the location becomes associated with a specific quality of honesty. She had 2 cups of tea. She offered him one when he came through the garden gate. "How are the ruins?" she asked. "Good," he said. Inscription changed. Present now. She looked at him with those deep water eyes. "That suits you better than vacant." "Most things do," he said, and she made a sound that was a genuine laugh, short, surprised, not the composed sound she made in company but the actual one, and it was different and better and he thought he could get used to hearing it. They sat on the steps with the morning around them, and the tea was good, Asia's blend, not the vending machine variety, and the garden was warming in the early sun. 6 months, Rias said. 6 months, he agreed. We can do a great deal in 6 months. We can. She turned to look at him, and the expression she wore was the one he'd come to associate with her being fully present rather than managing the moment, open, direct, without the diplomatic layer. "I'm going to say something," she said, "and I want you to let me finish before you respond." "All right," he said. "When you arrived here, I was practical about it," she said. "I had good reasons for everything I did, the documentation, the warding, the resources. All of it had a rational basis." She paused. I told myself that the entire time, and I was not wrong, but I was also not completely honest. She held his gaze. You were the most interesting person I'd encountered in a very long time. Not because of the title or the political implications. Just you. The way you think. The way you see people. A beat. The way you looked at me like I was a person who had a particular thing she needed rather than a function to be understood and used. He waited. She'd said she wanted to finish. I'm not good at this, she said. At whatever this is. I'm good at the political version of most things and I'm significantly worse at the personal version. I know that. She looked at him. But I'm trying. I wanted you to know I'm trying. He looked at her for a moment. You're better at it than you think, he said. You're being kind. I'm being accurate, he said. And you're conflating competence with fluency. You're not fluent in this yet, but you're competent. You feel the right things. You make the right decisions even when they cost you something. He held her gaze. The word home in that corridor wasn't a mistake. You meant it. That's not someone who's bad at this. She was very still. You heard that, she said. I heard it, he said. The morning was very quiet around them. A bird somewhere in the garden. The distant sound of the ward repair, Rosweiss's precise work, Kiba's patient assistance. Are you going to keep not being in my peerage, she asked. It was asked with a quality that had some humor in it, not defensive, not pressuring, something lighter. For now, he said, which was what he'd said at the beginning, and it meant something different now than it had then, and they both understood the difference. For now, she repeated, and the way she said it was an entire conversation. She leaned slightly, fractionally, and her shoulder was against his, and they sat like that in the morning quiet and drank their tea and neither of them said anything for a while because everything relevant had been said and what remained was the comfortable weight of two people who have decided, in their own way and at their own pace, that they would rather be where the other one is. Inside, Aquino was helping Asia with something in the kitchen that appeared to involve a recipe and a minor disagreement about quantities, their voices threading through the garden door with the quality of a conversation that was genuinely fun. Kaneko had apparently relocated her napping operation to the garden wall and was a small blanket-wrapped shape 20 feet away, either asleep or doing a perfect impression of it. From the outer wall, the controlled pulse of Rosweiss's ward work moved through the ground in steady waves. Xenovia appeared from the east wing door and looked at them on the steps for a moment. Training in an hour, she said to Izuku. We're finding somewhere with more room. I'll be there, he said. She looked at them, at the shoulders touching, at the tea, at the morning quality of the whole scene, and her expression did the small shift it did when something filed itself in a different category than she'd expected. Good, she said, and went back inside. An hour later he was in a field 3 kilometers east of town, in the flat open space between the forest edge and an abandoned agricultural lot that had enough room for what he needed. Xenovia stood across from him in the morning light, Durandal in hand, and the energy she was projecting was different from every previous session, not testing, not probing, not running an assessment. Just ready. Fully ready, the way she'd been in the raiding game when she'd put the sword down and used herself instead. Full power, she said. Both of us. Both of us, he agreed. Rules. Don't die, he said. And actually mean it this time. She looked at him. Something in her expression was clear in the way of someone who has recently had several things confirmed that they've been hoping were true and is still getting used to the confirmation. Come on then, she said. He let the Beast King presence come fully forward, not just revealed, not just present, but moving, active, the full weight of what he was flowing into his movement and his awareness and the way he occupied the space. The field around them responded, the grass, the earth, the quality of the air, everything that had any relationship with the natural world registering what was in it. She came at him like a falling star. He met her. The impact when Durandal met his guard sent a shockwave through the field that flattened the grass in a 20-meter radius and shook the tree line. He held it, actually held it, not redirected, stood his ground with the weight of the engagement fully present, and pushed back. She adjusted, transitioned, came from 3 different angles in 4 seconds, and each time he was exactly where he needed to be, not because he was faster, not because he was stronger in any simple sense, but because the Beast King authority and 11 years of the hardest fighting his old world had to offer had produced something that didn't have a simple category. She was brilliant. She was one of the most talented physical combatants he'd ever encountered, and he'd fought people who could destroy mountains. She'd figured out 3 weeks ago that he was something different, and she'd spent those weeks figuring out how to fight something different, and the result was genuinely challenging in the way only real opponents are. They fought for 40 minutes. Not sparring. Not training. Fighting, the real kind, where both parties are fully present and fully committed and the stakes feel genuine even when they're managed. The field accumulated damage in overlapping patterns, the grass torn and the earth churned and the air permanently charged with the discharged energy of Durandal and the Beast King resonance trading impact. She caught him twice, a hit to his left side that was going to be a spectacular bruise, and a thrust she transitioned so quickly he only partially read it that caught his right shoulder. He caught her once, a redirect that used her momentum and deposited her in the torn grass, face up, his hand at her collar, holding. They were both breathing hard. She looked up at him from the ground with an expression that was processing multiple things in parallel, the physical reality of the fight, something else, something she was letting be visible. "You went full power," she said. "You asked for it," he said. "It's different," she said. "At full power you feel different. Not bigger. More," she searched for it, "more there." He let her up. She stood, and they faced each other in the wrecked field, both of them marked by the fight, both of them more present than they'd been 40 minutes ago. "You hit me twice," he said. "You put me down once," she said. "That means you're faster and I'm more stable." He rolled his right shoulder, assessing. "We're useful to each other." She looked at him for a moment. "I know," she said, and the way she said it, direct, no decoration, in her voice rather than past it, covered more ground than the 2 words suggested. "Come on," he said. "Rias will have questions about the field damage." "She always has questions," Xenovia said, with the tone of someone who finds this mildly exasperating and not at all objectionable. They walked back toward town in the morning light, and the field behind them was thoroughly demolished and neither of them minded, and the distance between their shoulders as they walked was something Xenovia had chosen and he hadn't adjusted, and the morning was very clear and the world was entirely alive. 6 months, he thought, as Kuo came into view. 6 months, and then whatever came after 6 months, and after that whatever came after that. Vritra would recalibrate. The political landscape would continue to be complicated. There would be more sessions, more challenges, more moments that required him to stand on the central floor of something difficult and hold his ground without becoming something smaller. But there would also be this. The estate and the kitchen and the morning steps and the training field and the library at 2 in the morning. There would be Rias's word home and Akino's door opening a small amount and staying open and Asia's adjusted Katsudan and Kaniko's text message and Rosweiss' precise work and Zenovia's shoulder close to his as they walked. There would be the ruins, lit from within, the inscription changed, the stag in the morning forest with its starlight coat and its ancient dignity. There would be himself, not a vessel for inherited power, not a symbol designed by someone else's need, not a weapon shaped by someone else's fear. Himself, with all his damage and all his warmth and all his 11 years of learning that the point of strength was always, always, what you chose to do with it. The Beast King. Not vacant. Not waiting. Present.